Hi guys, tonight we step into a world that still feels warm, still feels alive in a quiet, steady way. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast open landscape where soft grasses move gently in the breeze and the air carries the faint scent of damp earth and distant water. Somewhere far away you hear the slow rhythm of animals moving through the land, not in panic, not in urgency, but in the calm pattern of a world that has not yet been disturbed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always comforting to imagine all of you listening from different quiet corners of the night. Now dim the lights and let yourself settle into this moment. You take a slow breath, and the air feels soft against your skin, neither too cold nor too warm. This is a time long before cities, before roads, before anything that might feel familiar to you today. You're standing somewhere in the late Pleistocene, a period that stretched across tens of thousands of years when early humans shared the earth with giant animals and wide-open ecosystems. At this point in history, the planet is still relatively stable. Glaciers exist, yes, but they remain distant in many regions, locked into slow cycles of advance and retreat. Many areas are rich with life. Grasslands stretch far into the horizon. Rivers flow steadily, fed by seasonal rains and melting ice. Forests stand thick with trees filled with birds, insects, and quiet hidden movement. You begin to walk. The ground beneath your feet feels firm but forgiving, a mixture of soil and scattered plant matter. There are no roads here, no clear paths, just faint trails left by animals that have passed through over time. You follow one of these trails without thinking too much about it. It feels natural, almost instinctive, as though your body already understands how to move through this place. In this era, early humans lived as hunter-gatherers. They did not farm, did not build permanent settlements, and did not store large amounts of food. Instead, they moved with the seasons, following herds, gathering plants, adapting constantly to what the land provided. This way of life had existed for tens of thousands of years, and for the most part it worked. You pause for a moment and look around. Not far from you, a small group of animals move slowly across the plain. Their bodies are large, heavier than anything you would expect to see in the modern world. During the late Pleistocene, many regions were home to what scientists call megafauna, animals like mammoths, giant deer, and enormous bison. These creatures shaped the land in subtle ways, grazing, migrating, and creating patterns that other species followed. Some researchers suggest that early humans depended heavily on these large animals, not only for food, but also for tools, clothing, and shelter materials. Others argue that while hunting was important, gathering plants and smaller animals played an equally significant role. The balance between these survival strategies is still something scholars continue to examine, piecing together clues from bones tools and ancient campsites. You continue walking and the air shifts slightly as a faint breeze passes over the land. It carries with it a hint of moisture, perhaps from a nearby river or lake. Water is everywhere in this world, not always visible, but present in the rhythms of the land. Seasonal rains arrive with some consistency. Rivers rarely disappear entirely. Even in drier regions, there are usually ways to find water if you know where to look. Today, of course, you might turn on a tap and expect water to flow instantly. Back then, every drop mattered. Knowledge of water sources could mean the difference between survival and quiet disappearance. You notice something else as you move forward. The sky. It stretches wide above you, pale blue and almost endless, with only a few scattered clouds drifting slowly across it. The sunlight feels gentle, filtered slightly by the atmosphere, but still strong enough to warm your skin. There is a sense of balance here, a kind of quiet agreement between the sky and the land. But if you stay still long enough, if you pay close attention, you might begin to sense something subtle, something not quite right. Perhaps it is the way the wind changes direction just a little more often than expected, or the way certain plants seem slightly less vibrant than they should be at this time of year. It is nothing dramatic, nothing that would alarm you immediately, just a faint shift, almost like the first quiet note of a much larger change. Historians and climate scientists often look back at this period as one of transition. Around 12,900 years ago, the Earth entered a sudden cooling phase known as the Younger Dryas. This event caused temperatures in some regions to drop, rapidly disrupting ecosystems and forcing both animals and humans to adapt quickly. Yet the exact cause of this shift remains uncertain. Some scientists believe it was triggered by massive releases of fresh water into the oceans, disrupting global circulation patterns. Others propose more unusual explanations, including the possibility of a comet impact. The evidence is still debated and no single explanation has been universally accepted. For now, though, you are standing just before that shift. You kneel down and touch the ground. It feels alive in a quiet way, holding warmth from the day, supporting small plants and hidden roots beneath the surface. There is no frost here, no harsh bite of cold. Not yet. In the distance, you hear a bird call. It echoes briefly, then fades. The world feels calm, almost reassuring. And yet there is something in the stillness that invites reflection. You might find yourself wondering how long this balance can last, how something so vast and steady could ever begin to change. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part, because when change comes, it rarely announces itself all at once. Instead, it begins like this, quietly, almost invisibly. You stand again and continue walking, unaware that the path ahead will slowly lead into a world that feels colder, harsher, and far less forgiving than the one beneath your feet now. For the moment, though, everything still feels whole, and the Earth in this fragile moment still feels like a place where life can continue without question. You continue forward at an unhurried pace, the rhythm of your steps matching the quiet stability of the land around you. The air still feels generous, still carries that gentle balance between warmth and coolness. Nothing presses against you. Nothing demands urgency. And for now, that is what makes this moment feel so complete. You move across a stretch of open grassland where tall blades brush softly against your legs. They sway in long, slow waves, bending together whenever the wind passes through. It creates a soft, whispering sound, almost like the land is speaking in a language too subtle to fully understand. In this period, environments like these were incredibly important for both animals and early humans. Grassland supported large grazing herds, and those herds in turn supported predators and human groups who depended on them. It was a system built on movement, on seasonal patterns, on understanding of where to go and when. You pause again, lowering yourself slightly as you watch a group of animals in the distance. They move with calm confidence, not in a tight formation, but loosely as if the land itself is guiding them. Their size is striking. Some tower above you with thick fur and heavy limbs adapted for colder conditions that still exist in parts of the world. Others are smaller, quicker, grazing close to the ground. A widely accepted understanding is that many of these animals followed predictable migration routes, returning to the same regions year after year. Early humans likely learned these patterns over time, building knowledge that could be passed quietly from one person to another, from one generation to the next. And yet there is something quietly fascinating here. Some researchers suggest that not all migrations were as predictable as once believed. There is growing evidence that certain animal populations shifted their routes more frequently than expected, responding to subtle environmental changes that humans may not have immediately noticed. This raises a question that scholars still explore. Were early humans always following the animals, or were they sometimes reacting to changes at the same time, learning as they went? You watch as one of the animals lifts its head, pausing mid-step. For a moment, everything feels still. Then it lowers its head again, continuing as before. Nothing seems wrong. You begin to walk once more this time, angling slightly toward a line of trees visible in the distance. As you approach, the air begins to change. It becomes cooler, shaded by the canopy above. The scent shifts too from open grass to something richer, more layered. You catch hints of leaves, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of something growing unseen. The forest welcomes you in a quiet way. Light filters down through the branches in soft broken patterns. The ground beneath your feet becomes softer, layered with fallen leaves and small twigs that crack gently as you step. Somewhere nearby you hear the subtle movement of something small, perhaps an animal slipping quietly through the undergrowth. Forests like this were not just places of shelter, but also places of gathering. Early humans would have found a wide variety of food sources here, from edible plants to small animals. They would have known which areas were safe, which were not, and how to move without drawing attention. Today you might walk through a forest with a clear path, perhaps even marked with signs. Here there is nothing like that. Every step depends on awareness. Every sound matters. You reach down and brush your fingers along the bark of a tree. It feels rough, solid, grounded in a way that suggests permanence. These trees have stood here for years, perhaps decades, quietly growing, adapting to the same cycles of light and rain that define this world. But even here in this calm space, there are small details that invite attention. You notice that some leaves seem slightly thinner than expected. Some branches carry fewer clusters of growth. It is not enough to stand out immediately, but once you see it, it becomes difficult to ignore. This is the nature of gradual change. It does not arrive with noise or warning. It builds slowly, layer by layer, until one day it becomes impossible to overlook. Scholars who study ancient climate patterns often rely on clues like these preserved in pollen, samples, tree rings, and sediment layers. These records suggest that environmental changes can begin long before they become visible in dramatic ways. Temperature shifts, changes in rainfall, slight variations in seasonal timing, all of these can quietly reshape ecosystems over time. You continue deeper into the forest. The light grows dimmer, more filtered. The sounds shift as well. The open wind of the grasslands is replaced by smaller, more contained noises. A branch creaks somewhere above you. Leaves rustle gently at ground level. A distant bird call echoes briefly, then disappears. You find a small clearing and stop. Here the light opens again, touching the ground in a soft, pale glow. In the centre you notice signs of past activity. A scattering of stones arranged in a loose circle. Faint marks on the ground that suggest repeated use. This could have been a temporary camp, a place where a group once stopped for a short time before moving on. It is a reminder of how people lived here. They did not stay in one place for long. Movement was survival. Staying too long in one area could mean exhausting resources or exposing themselves to changing conditions. Some historians suggest that mobility was one of the greatest strengths of early humans. Others point out that constant movement also brought risks, especially as environments became less predictable. The balance between staying and moving is something that continues to be examined, with no single answer that fully explains every situation. You crouch slightly, running your hand over the ground. It feels cool, cooler than you expected. You pause, and for the first time the thought enters your mind more clearly. Something is shifting, not dramatically. Not yet, but enough to notice. You straighten slowly, looking around once more. The forest still stands, the animals still move, the air still carries life. And yet beneath all of it, there is a quiet sense that this abundance, this balance may not last forever. You take another step forward, deeper into a world that still feels full, still feels stable, but is beginning in the smallest ways to change. You move on from the quiet clearing, leaving behind the faint traces of those who once paused here. The forest begins to thin gradually, and with each step more light reaches the ground. The air shifts again, becoming slightly drier, though still gentle enough that you might not question it at first. There is no sudden change, no clear dividing line between what was and what will be. Instead, the world unfolds in small adjustments that your senses begin to pick up almost without your permission. You step out from the trees into another open stretch of land. This one feels different from the last. The grass is still present, still moving with the wind, but it seems shorter, in places less dense. The colour is just a shade duller, leaning more toward pale yellow than deep green. You pause, letting your gaze travel slowly across the horizon. At first, everything appears familiar, but the longer you look, the more you notice small inconsistencies. A patch of ground where nothing grows, a cluster of plants that seem to have withered earlier than expected. The wind itself feels slightly sharper as it brushes across your skin, carrying less warmth than before. In many prehistoric environments, temperature and moisture were closely linked. Even a slight drop in average temperature could affect rainfall patterns, shortening growing seasons and reducing the availability of water. These changes often happened gradually, but their effects could spread widely across entire regions. You take a slow breath. The scent of the air has changed too. There is still earth, still a hint of vegetation, but something is missing. The richness feels thinner, as though the land is offering just a little less than it once did. You begin walking again, more aware now of each sensation. A faint sound reaches you from the distance. At first it is difficult to place, a low uneven rhythm that blends with the movement of the wind. You turn slightly, listening more carefully, and eventually you recognize it. Footsteps. A group of animals moving together. You walk toward the sound, careful not to disturb the ground too much. As you approach, you see them emerging from a shallow dip in the land. A small herd, perhaps 10 or 12 individuals moving at a steady pace. But something about them feels different. Their movement is not as relaxed as before. There is a subtle tension in the way they step, a slight quickness that suggests awareness. Not panic, not fear exactly, but a kind of alertness that lingers just beneath the surface. A commonly accepted understanding is that animals are often among the first to respond to environmental stress. Changes in temperature, shifts in vegetation, and variations in water availability can all influence behavior long before humans fully recognize the cause. You watch as one of the animals stops and lifts its head. Its ears twitch. Its body remains still for a moment longer than seems natural. Then, without any obvious signal, the group begins to move again, slightly faster now, angling away from the direction they came. Some researchers propose that these early behavioral shifts in animals may have provided subtle warnings to human groups, though interpreting those signals would not always have been straightforward. Others argue that while animals did respond quickly, humans likely understood environmental changes through a broader range of observations, including plant growth, weather patterns, and water sources. You remain still until the herd disappears from view. The silence that follows feels heavier than before. You begin to walk again, this time paying closer attention to the sky. It still stretches wide above you, but the colour seems just a little less vibrant. A thin haze lingers in the distance, barely noticeable, unless you focus on it directly. It softens the edges of faraway hills, making them appear slightly blurred, as if seen through a faint veil. You might not think much of it. After all, skies change all the time. But in this moment, combined with everything else, it becomes part of a pattern that is slowly forming. You bend down near a cluster of plants, running your fingers gently along their leaves. They feel drier than expected. Not brittle, not lifeless, but lacking the fullness they should have. In stable conditions, plants follow predictable cycles of growth, responding to consistent patterns of light, temperature, and moisture. When those patterns begin to shift even slightly, the effects can ripple outward, influencing everything that depends on them. You stand again and continue forward. The wind picks up, briefly moving across the land in a steady sweep. It carries dust, this time a fine layer that brushes lightly against your skin. You lift a hand, instinctively shielding your eyes for a moment. Dust is not unusual in open environments, but the frequency, the subtle persistence of it feels new. You lower your hand and look around. The horizon seems a little less clear. The colours of the land feel slightly muted, and once again you sense it. That quiet, almost unspoken shift. Historians and climate scientists often examine this period closely because it marks the beginning of a more noticeable transition. The Younger Dryas event, which would soon take hold, brought colder and drier conditions to many parts of the Northern Hemisphere. The speed of this change, especially compared to earlier gradual shifts, continues to puzzle researchers. Some scientists suggest that melting ice sheets released vast amounts of fresh water into the oceans, disrupting currents that helped regulate global climate. Others continue to explore alternative explanations, noting that the evidence is complex and sometimes conflicting. You walk toward a slight rise in the land and step up onto it. From here you can see farther. The landscape stretches out in wide layers, grasslands fading into distant tree lines, then into low hills beyond. It is still beautiful, still alive, but no longer untouched. You wrap your arms lightly around yourself, not out of cold exactly, but out of a growing awareness. The air has changed. The land has changed, and although nothing has collapsed, nothing has broken apart, the balance you felt earlier now feels less certain. You take one more slow breath. The world around you remains quiet, but beneath that quiet something has begun. Something slow, something steady, and something that will not easily reverse. You continue across the open land, your steps slower now, not because you are tired, but because something inside you has begun to pay closer attention. The world still looks familiar, still holds together in a way that feels almost reassuring, yet each moment carries a subtle difference that did not exist before. The air feels drier, not harsh, not uncomfortable, just slightly thinner, as though the moisture that once lingered here has begun to fade. You walk toward a low depression in the ground where water might once have collected. From a distance it looks promising, a darker patch against the pale grass, hinting at damp soil or a shallow pool. But as you draw closer, the truth reveals itself quietly. The ground is cracked, not deeply, not dramatically, but enough to form thin lines that stretch across the surface in uneven patterns. You kneel and press your fingers against it. The soil is cool but firm in a way that suggests it has not held water for some time. In many prehistoric regions, water availability depended heavily on seasonal rainfall. When those rains began to shift even slightly, the effects could be felt almost immediately. Streams would run shorter distances, pools would evaporate sooner, plants would receive less nourishment. You rise slowly and look around. There is no obvious sign of panic in the landscape, no sudden absence of the life, but there is a growing sense of restraint, as though the land is beginning to hold back what it once gave freely. You move on, following a gentle slope downward. In the distance you hear the faint sound of water, and for a moment relief settles over you. The sound is soft but steady enough to draw you forward with quiet determination. You walk a little faster, your steps guided by that familiar, comforting rhythm. When you arrive you find a river, or rather what remains of one. It still flows, but its width has narrowed. The banks, once likely fuller and softer, now sit exposed in places, revealing layers of earth that have not seen open air for a long time. The water itself moves more slowly, its surface broken occasionally by small ripples rather than the constant motion you might expect. You crouch at the edge and dip your fingers into it. It is cold, clear, still alive, but reduced. A widely accepted observation among researchers is that rivers and lakes often serve as early indicators of environmental stress. Changes in precipitation temperature and evaporation can all alter water levels, sometimes over surprisingly short periods of time. You lift your hand, watching the droplets fall back into the current. Each one disappears almost instantly, absorbed into the slow movement of the river. You sit for a moment listening. The sound is softer than it should be, less confident, as though the river itself is conserving energy. Some scientists propose that during periods of rapid climate change, water systems can become unstable, fluctuating between abundance and scarcity before settling into a new pattern. Others suggest that these shifts may have varied widely, depending on the region, making it difficult to form a single unified explanation. You remain still, letting the quiet settle around you. Then you notice something else. The edges of the riverbank show fewer signs of animal activity than expected. There are still tracks, faint impressions left in the softer soil, but they are scattered, less frequent, and in some places older than they should be. Animals depend on water as much as anything else. When water becomes less reliable, their movements change. They may travel farther, take new routes, or abandon familiar places entirely. You stand and follow the river for a short distance. Along the way, you pass clusters of plants that cling to the remaining moisture. Their leaves are smaller, tighter, as if holding on to what little water they can retain. Some bend slightly toward the river, their growth shaped by necessity rather than abundance. In stable environments, vegetation often spreads outward, taking advantage of consistent resources. Here you see the opposite. Growth is pulling inward, concentrating around what remains. You pause again and look up at the sky. It still carries light, still stretches across the horizon, but the clarity feels different. There is a faint dullness, not enough to darken the day, but enough to soften the brightness. You begin to walk away from the river, climbing gently back toward higher ground. As you do, the silence grows more noticeable. Not empty, not lifeless, but restrained. You hear fewer insects, fewer distant calls. The wind moves through the grass, but even that sound feels lighter, less full. You might find yourself wondering how long this has been happening. Days, seasons, years. The truth is, changes like this often unfold over long periods, making them difficult to measure in the moment. For those living within them, there is no clear beginning, no exact point where everything shifts from one state to another. Only the gradual realization that something is no longer the same. You reach the top of the slope and turn back for one last look at the river. From here it appears as a thin winding line reflecting just enough light to catch your eye. It still exists, still moves, still supports life. But it no longer dominates the landscape as it once might have. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, though not sharply so. Just enough to notice if you're paying attention. And you are. You turn forward again and continue walking, carrying with you the quiet understanding that water once reliable is becoming uncertain, and in a world where survival depends on patterns, on repetition, on trust in the land, even a small uncertainty can begin to change everything. You move farther from the river, carrying with you the memory of its quieter flow. The land rises gently, guiding you toward another stretch of woodland. From a distance it looks familiar, almost comforting, a place where shade and life gather together. But as you approach, something feels different. The trees still stand, their forms reaching upward in quiet strength. Their trunks are thick, their branches spread wide. Yet the space between them feels more open than before, as though something has thinned the density without fully removing it. You step beneath the canopy. The light dims, slightly filtering through leaves that seem fewer, more scattered. It creates a pattern on the ground that feels less layered, less rich than what you experienced earlier. The air is cooler here, but also drier. You notice it immediately. The usual scent of damp earth is faint, replaced by something lighter, almost neutral. You take a slow breath, trying to catch the deeper notes that once filled spaces like this, but they do not fully return. In earlier periods, forests like these were dense with life. Layers of vegetation supported insects, birds, and small animals in complex interconnected systems. The forest floor would have been rich with decay and renewal, constantly cycling nutrients back into the soil. Now that cycle feels quieter. You walk carefully, your steps softened by the scattered leaves beneath you. They crackle gently, a dry sound that lingers just a moment longer than it should. You glance down and notice that many of the leaves have curled slightly at the edges, their surfaces thinner, more fragile. This is how change reveals itself here. Not in absence, but in reduction. You pause beside a fallen branch and reach down to touch it. It breaks more easily than expected. You hold the smaller piece in your hand for a moment, turning it slowly. It is not completely dry, but it lacks the flexibility it should have. You set it back down and straighten your gaze, drifting through the trees. There is movement in the distance. A small animal, perhaps darting briefly between trunks before disappearing again. The forest is not empty. Life continues, adapting quietly, finding ways to persist even as conditions shift. Some researchers note that smaller animals often adjust more quickly to environmental changes than larger ones. Their shorter lifespans and faster reproduction allow them to respond in ways that larger species cannot. Others suggest that while adaptation is possible, it often comes with trade-offs, changes in behavior or habitat that may not fully compensate for the loss of stability. You continue forward listening. The forest is not silent, but the sounds are spaced farther apart. A single bird call echoes, then fades without reply. A branch creaks overhead, shifting slightly in the breeze. The usual layering of sound, the constant background of life feels thinner. You reach a narrow path, barely visible, formed by repeated movement over time. You follow it instinctively, letting it guide you deeper into the trees. After a short while, you come upon a clearing. The ground here is more exposed patches of bare soil interrupting the scattered grass. A few trees stand at the edges, their branches reaching inward, but leaving the centre open to the sky. You step into the clearing and stop. The light here feels stronger, but also harsher. Not warmer, just less softened. You look around and notice that some of the plants near the centre have not grown as fully as they might have before. Their stems are shorter, their leaves are smaller. They appear to be conserving energy, focusing on survival rather than expansion. In stable climates, plant growth tends to follow predictable patterns, expanding outward when conditions allow. When those conditions become uncertain, growth often slows or becomes uneven. You walk to the centre and crouch, brushing your hand across the soil. It feels looser on the surface, but beneath that it hardens quickly. Moisture is present, but not deeply. It sits closer to the top, vulnerable to evaporation. You press your fingers a little deeper. Cool, but limited. You sit back, slightly resting your hands on your knees. There is a sense here not of collapse, but of restraint, as though the forest is holding itself together using only what it must. You lift your gaze again, scanning the edges of the clearing. The trees stand quietly, but their leaves shift more often, now responding to a wind that feels less predictable. It comes in short bursts, then fades, then returns from a slightly different direction. Wind patterns are often overlooked, yet they play a significant role in shaping environments. Changes in temperature across regions can alter how air moves, influencing everything from rainfall to the spread of seeds. You stand slowly. In the distance, you hear something faint, a low crackling sound. At first, it blends with the movement of branches, but as you listen more carefully, it becomes distinct. Dryness, wood shifting under tension. Not fire, not yet, but the kind of sound that suggests how easily fire could take hold. You turn your head slightly, trying to locate the source, but it fades quickly, leaving only the quiet once more. Moments like this linger. They do not demand attention, but once noticed, they remain with you. You step back from the centre of the clearing and return to the path. As you walk, you find yourself moving more slowly again, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. Each detail seems to matter now. Each sound, each shift in light, each change in texture. You reach the edge of the forest and pause. Beyond it, the land stretches out again, open and wide. From here you can see farther than before, and what you see carries a subtle difference. The colours are softer. The contrast between green and earth is less defined. The horizon feels slightly blurred. You take a long, quiet breath. The forest behind you still stands. The land ahead still lives, but something essential is beginning to fade. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to be felt, and in that feeling there is a quiet understanding. The world is not as full as it once was. You step out from the thinning forest and into the open, once more the shift in light immediate but not harsh. The sky stretches above you in a pale, steady blue, yet something about it feels less settled than before. The air carries a dryness that lingers on your skin, subtle but persistent, as though it is slowly drawing something away. You walk across the land at an even pace, your senses now tuned to small details you might once have overlooked. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer, in places almost compacted, and the grass grows in uneven patches, leaving thin stretches of exposed soil between them. A faint scent reaches you. At first, it is difficult to place. Then you recognize it. Smoke. You stop. It is not strong, not overwhelming, but present enough to pull your attention toward the horizon. You turn slowly, scanning the distance, and there it is. A thin line of grey rising into the sky, soft and wavering, barely visible against the pale light. Fire has always existed in this world. Natural fires, often sparked by lightning, have shaped ecosystems for thousands of years. They clear old growth, return nutrients to the soil, and create space for new life to emerge. In many regions, these fires were part of a natural cycle, appearing occasionally and then fading. But something about this feels different. You begin walking toward it, not quickly, but with quiet curiosity. As you move, the scent grows stronger, carrying with it a dry, almost bitter edge. The wind shifts slightly, pushing the smoke across the land in thin, drifting layers. You reach a rise and step onto it, giving yourself a clearer view. In the distance, a section of land burns, the flames not towering. They move low across the ground, feeding on dry grass and scattered brush. The fire spreads in uneven patterns, advancing slowly, then pausing, then moving again as the wind guides it. You watch in silence. Fire like this can be both destructive and renewing. It depends on timing, on intensity, on how often it occurs. In balanced conditions, vegetation has time to recover between burns, but in drier environments, fires can become more frequent, reducing that recovery time and gradually weakening the land. Some researchers suggest that as climates shift toward dryness, fire activity tends to increase, creating feedback loops that further reduce vegetation and moisture. Others note that fire patterns vary widely depending on local conditions, making it difficult to apply a single explanation to every region. You take a slow breath. The air feels warmer here, not from the sun, but from the distant heat of the fire. It reaches you gently, carried across the land in faint waves. You notice something else. The animals, at the edge of your vision, movement catches your attention. A small group moves away from the direction of the fire, not in panic, but with clear intention. Their pace is steady, their path direct. They have done this before, or something like it. Animals often respond quickly to fire, guided by instinct and experience. They know when to move, where to go, how to avoid the advancing edge. But the frequency matters. If fires become too common, too widespread, even these instinctive responses may not be enough. You watch them disappear into the distance, their forms blending into the shifting colours of the land. Then you turn your attention back to the flames. They continue their slow advance, consuming what lies in their path. The grass curls and darkens. Small plants vanish almost instantly. The soil beneath is left exposed, its surface altered in ways that may take time to recover. You might expect fear in this moment, but what you feel instead is something quieter. Awareness. This is not a single event, it is part of something larger. You turn away from the fire and begin walking again, choosing a path that leads you across the wind rather than directly into it. The smoke thins as you move, fading gradually until it becomes only a faint memory in the air. The land stretches out before you, but it feels different now. Not empty, not broken, but changed. You pass through another patch of grassland and once again you notice the uneven growth. Some areas remain relatively full while others appear sparse, as though something has interrupted the pattern. You crouch briefly, touching the ground. It feels warm on the surface, warmed by the sun, but beneath that it holds less moisture than it should. You press your fingers down and find resistance sooner than expected. You stand again and continue. The wind picks up, moving steadily across the open space. It carries with it fine particles of dust, not enough to obscure your vision, but enough to soften the edges of the landscape. Dust like this often appears when soil loses its binding moisture. Without sufficient water, the surface becomes loose, more easily lifted and carried by the wind. You lift your hand, slightly watching as the fine grains pass over your skin. They feel dry, almost weightless. You lower your hand and look toward the horizon once more. The sky remains open, but its clarity feels diminished. A faint haze lingers, blending light and distance into softer, less defined shapes. You continue walking, your steps steady. The fire behind you fades from view, but its presence lingers in your thoughts. Not as a single moment, but as part of a pattern you're beginning to understand. Water becoming uncertain, plants growing more cautiously, animals adjusting their movements, and now fire appearing with a quiet persistence. You take a slow breath. The air feels thinner again. You wrap your arms lightly around yourself, not from cold, but from a growing awareness of how each element of this world connects to the others. Nothing here exists in isolation. When one part shifts, the rest follows. You walk on, moving deeper into a landscape that still holds life, still carries beauty, but is beginning piece by piece to change in ways that cannot easily be reversed. You continue across the open land, the memory of smoke still faint in the air behind you. The ground feels more exposed now, with wider stretches of soil visible between clusters of grass. Each step presses lightly into the surface, leaving a mark that lingers a little longer than it would have before. The wind moves steadily, brushing past you in soft, uneven currents. It carries less scent now, less moisture. The richness that once filled the air has thinned, leaving something quieter, more restrained. You walk toward a shallow valley ahead. From a distance, it appears similar to others you have seen, a gentle dip in the land where water and life might gather. Valleys often hold more resources, offering shelter from wind and better access to moisture. They are places where animals tend to pass through, where movement concentrates. As you descend, you slow your pace. Something feels different. You scan the ground, expecting to see a network of tracks overlapping paths formed by repeated crossings. And there are tracks, but fewer than you would expect. They appear scattered, less defined, some already softened by time and wind. You kneel, briefly examining one of them. It is still clear enough to recognize, but its edges are fading. In environments with regular animal movement, tracks are constantly renewed, layered over one another in a continuous pattern. When that pattern breaks, it often suggests a change in behavior, in movement, or in population. You rise and continue downward. At the base of the valley, you find a small cluster of shrubs. Their leaves are narrow, slightly curled, holding tightly to their stems. You brush your fingers along them, noticing how firm they feel, as though conserving what little moisture remains. Nearby, a few scattered plants have not survived the shift as well. Their stems are dry, their structure weakened, leaning slightly as though they could collapse with a stronger wind. You take a slow breath and look outward. The valley's quiet, not empty, but quieter than it should be. A widely accepted pattern in ecological studies is that when conditions begin to deteriorate, larger animals often reduce their presence in affected areas, seeking more stable regions. Smaller species may remain longer, but even they begin to adjust over time. You listen carefully. At first there is nothing. Then faintly you hear movement. You turn toward the sound and see them. A herd, smaller than the ones you observed earlier. They move along the far edge of the valley, their bodies angled slightly as if navigating with purpose rather than ease. Their pace is steady, but there is a noticeable tension in their movement. You watch them closely. They do not pause to graze. They do not spread out. They remain grouped, moving as one, following a line that seems already decided. Some scholars propose that shifts in herd behavior can reflect changing environmental pressures, with animals prioritizing movement over feeding when resources become uncertain. Others suggest that social dynamics within the herd may also play a role influencing how and when they relocate. You follow their path with your eyes until they disappear behind a rise. The silence returns, but now it feels different, heavier. You begin to walk again, crossing the valley floor. As you move, you notice that the ground here is uneven, small patches of soil appearing more compacted while others seem loose and disturbed. You stop and crouch, pressing your hand into one of the softer areas. It shifts easily, too easily. Without consistent plant roots to hold it together, soil can lose its structure, becoming more vulnerable to wind and erosion. Over time, this can reshape entire landscapes, altering how water flows and how plants grow. You stand again and continue toward the opposite side of the valley. As you climb, the wind grows stronger, moving more freely across the open space. It carries with it fine dust brushing lightly against your skin and clothing. You raise your hand for a moment, shielding your eyes as it passes. When you reach the top, you pause and turn back. From here, the valley looks still, calm, but you can see the difference now. The gaps between vegetation, the reduced movement, the absence of the layered tracks that once marked constant activity. You turn forward again. The land ahead stretches outward, but it feels less inviting. Not hostile, just uncertain. You walk on your pace, steady, your attention drawn to the horizon. After some time you notice something new, or rather something missing. The large silhouettes that once moved across the land are harder to find. Where earlier you could spot them in the distance, now you must search more carefully, and even then you see fewer. Large animals require vast amounts of food and water to survive. When those resources become limited, their populations can decline sometimes rapidly. This reduction can have cascading effects influencing everything from plant growth to predator behavior. You continue walking, scanning the land. Eventually you spot a lone figure in the distance. It moves slowly, separated from any group. Its steps are deliberate and measured. There is a quiet sense of effort in its movement. You watch for a moment, feeling a subtle shift within yourself. This is no longer a landscape of abundance. It is becoming a landscape of adjustment. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, though the sun still rests above. You wrap your arms lightly around yourself again, a small instinctive gesture. Then you lower them and continue forward. Each step carries you deeper into a world that is still alive, still holding on, but beginning to show clear signs of strain. The animals are moving, the land is thinning, and the balance that once felt so natural now feels increasingly fragile. You continue onward, leaving the quiet valley behind you. The land rises again in gentle slopes, but your pace has changed without you fully realizing it. You move more carefully now, not out of fear, but because each step carries more meaning than before. The air feels cooler. Not sharply so, but enough that you notice it settling differently against your skin. It lingers a little longer, brushing past your arms and face with a faint edge that was not there before. You walk toward a patch of low vegetation, hoping to find something familiar, something steady. As you approach, you slow and begin to examine what grows here. The plants are smaller, their leaves are tighter drawn inward, conserving what they can. Some show signs of stress, their colour uneven, their edges slightly curled. Others have not survived at all, leaving small gaps in the ground where life once held on. You kneel and reach out, touching one of the surviving plants. It feels firm, resilient in a quiet way, but limited. You pull your hand back slowly and look around. This is no longer a place of easy gathering. In earlier times, hunter-gatherer groups relied heavily on plants for daily sustenance. Fruits, roots, seeds, and leaves provided a consistent source of nutrition, often more reliable than hunting alone. Archaeological evidence suggests that plant gathering formed a significant portion of early human diets, even if it leaves fewer traces behind. You stand again, your gaze moving across the land. You imagine what it would feel like to depend on this place, to walk for hours and find less than expected, to return with only what the land is willing to give. A quiet weight settles into your awareness. Hunger does not arrive all at once. It begins slowly. You continue walking. The ground beneath your feet feels harder now, more resistant. Your steps create less impression, as though the surface has tightened, holding itself together with less moisture to soften it. After some time, you come across a small cluster of stones arranged loosely in a circle. You stop. This is familiar, a place where people once gathered. You move closer, crouching slightly as you examine the ground. There are faint signs of past activity, subtle marks that suggest repeated use. The centre of the circle is darker, perhaps from fire, perhaps from something that once burned here. You sit for a moment. The air around you feels still. You imagine a group gathered here not long ago. Voices low, movements quiet, hands working with what little they had. Some researchers point out that during times of scarcity, early human groups may have reduced their size or split into smaller units to improve their chances of survival. Others suggest that cooperation became even more important with shared resources and collective decision-making helping groups endure difficult periods. You glance around the area. There is no sign of recent return, no fresh tracks, no new disturbance. This place has been left behind. You stand slowly and step away from the circle. The realization settles in gently. Even places that once supported life are being abandoned. You walk on your senses alert. The wind shifts again, cooler now, moving across the land in longer, more steady currents. It carries with it a faint dryness that lingers in your throat when you breathe. You swallow, noticing the sensation. It is subtle, but new. You continue forward until you reach a small rise. From here you can see farther than before. The landscape stretches outward, but it feels less full, less occupied. You scan the horizon, searching for movement. There are animals, yes, but fewer, more spread out. Their presence no longer defines the land in the same way. You take a slow breath. The feeling in your body shifts. A quiet awareness of something deeper. Need. You imagine what it would be like to live here now, to wake each day and search, to move farther, expend more energy and receive less in return. There is a term often used in modern discussions of survival: energy balance. The idea that the energy you gain from food must outweigh the energy you spend to obtain it. When that balance begins to fail even slightly, the effects can grow quickly. You begin walking again, your pace steady but measured. The land offers little along the way. You pass more plants, more patches of soil, more signs of life holding on, but not thriving. You notice something else: the silence. It is not complete, but it has deepened. The layered sounds that once filled the space have thinned, leaving wider gaps between them. You hear the wind, your own footsteps, occasionally a distant call, but nothing sustained, nothing constant. You stop for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. This is what the early stages of hunger feel like. Not desperation, not yet, just the awareness that what once came easily now requires effort. What once felt certain now feels uncertain. You kneel again, pressing your hand against the ground. It is cool, but dry. You close your eyes, briefly focusing on the sensation. Then you open them and stand. You look out across the land once more. It still holds life, still offers something, but it is no longer generous. You take a slow breath and continue walking, each step carrying you deeper into a world where survival is beginning to demand more than it once did. You move forward with steady steps, though something within you has grown quieter, more focused. The land stretches wide ahead, yet it feels less defined, as if its edges have softened into something uncertain. The sky draws your attention again. It's still there, vast and open, but its colour has shifted. The pale blue you remember now seems dulled, touched by a faint haze that hangs across the horizon. It's not thick enough to block the light, but it changes the way the light reaches the ground. You squint slightly, trying to see farther. Distant shapes blur more easily now. Hills that once stood sharp against the sky appear softened their outlines, blending into the air itself. You continue walking. The sunlight feels different on your skin, less direct, filtered, as though something unseen has settled between the sky and the land. In periods of environmental disruption, particles such as dust or ash can accumulate in the atmosphere, scattering sunlight and altering temperature patterns. Even a thin layer can have noticeable effects over time, influencing how much warmth reaches the surface. You lift your hand, holding it briefly in the light. It looks the same, and yet the warmth you feel is less certain. You lower your hand and continue on. The ground beneath you is increasingly pale, the colour of dry earth spreading outward in patches that connect and widen as you walk. Vegetation still exists, but it no longer dominates the landscape. You pass through a stretch where the soil is exposed almost entirely. It feels loose beneath your feet. Each step sends a faint cloud upward, small particles lifting into the air and drifting away on the wind. You pause and watch them, noticing how easily they rise, how slowly they settle. Dust, more than before. You take a breath and feel it. Not unpleasant, but present. You turn your head slightly, looking across the land. The haze you noticed earlier now seems more consistent, stretching farther, touching more of the sky. It is not a single cloud or a passing layer. It lingers steady, almost unchanging. Some scientists studying ancient climate shifts suggest that large amounts of dust could have been lifted into the atmosphere during periods of drying, especially as vegetation declined and soil became more exposed. Others have explored the idea that external events such as impacts or sudden environmental disturbances might also have contributed to increased particles in the air. The evidence is complex and interpretations vary. You walk on the air, growing slightly cooler as the filtered light continues to soften the warmth of the sun. A faint sound reaches you. At first it is difficult to recognize. Then you understand. Wind moving across open ground, stronger than before. You turn into it, feeling it press gently against your body. It carries more dust now, small grains brushing your skin, catching lightly in your hair and clothing. You raise your arm, shielding your eyes for a moment. When you lower it, the world appears just a little less clear. Not hidden, but softened. You continue walking your pace unchanged. The land around you feels quieter still. You listen carefully, searching for the sounds that once filled this space. They are there, but distant, scattered. You move toward a low ridge and climb it slowly. At the top you stop. From here the view stretches far in every direction, and what you see confirms what you have been sensing. The land is fading, not disappearing, but losing its richness. The greens have dulled. The browns have spread. The contrast between life and earth has blurred. You take a long, slow breath. The air feels cooler now, not sharply cold, but enough to make you aware of the change. You wrap your arms lightly around yourself again, noticing how often this gesture returns. It is instinctive, a quiet response to a world that is no longer as warm as it once was. You lower your arms and look upward once more. The sky holds its pale light, but the haze remains. It does not move quickly. It does not break apart. It simply exists steady and persistent. You might find yourself wondering how long it has been there, when it first appeared, whether it will remain. You begin to walk down the other side of the ridge, the ground slopes gently guiding you into another open stretch of land. As you descend, the wind shifts slightly, moving across your path rather than against it. It carries the same dry scent, the same fine dust. You pass through another patch of exposed soil, your steps lifting small clouds that drift behind you. Each one lingers just a little longer than you expect. You pause again, turning back to watch them. They rise. They hang. They fade slowly into the air. This is how the atmosphere changes, not all at once, but through countless small moments like this. You turn forward and continue. The light dims slightly as the haze thickens just enough to soften the day further. The temperature follows, cooling, gradually. You feel it in your hands, in your face, in the way the air settles against your skin. You walk on deeper into this altered world, a world where the sky itself has begun to change, and with it everything below. You keep moving across the muted landscape, your steps steady, your breathing slow and even. The air feels cooler now, in a way that no longer hides itself. It settles around you with a quiet firmness, brushing against your skin and lingering there, as though the warmth that once filled this space has begun to withdraw. You notice it most in your hands. The slight chill that was once easy to ignore now remains no matter how long you walk. It does not bite, not yet, but it no longer fades as quickly as it once did. You lift your gaze toward the horizon. The light has changed again. It is still day, still clear enough to see, but the brightness feels reduced, softened not only by the haze above, but by something deeper, something affecting the very balance of warmth in the air. You continue forward, watching the ground closely. The soil appears paler, almost as if it has been drained of something essential. Vegetation still appears in scattered clusters, but it grows lower to the ground, now hugging the surface as though seeking shelter from the cooling air. You pass by a small patch of grass and kneel, brushing your fingers along its surface. It feels stiff, less flexible than before. You press gently, and it resists more than it should. Plants respond quickly to changes in temperature. When conditions become cooler, especially if combined with dryness, growth slows, and structures become more rigid as water content decreases. You stand again and continue walking. The wind shifts, carrying a cooler edge now. It moves steadily across the land, no longer in short, uneven bursts, but in longer, more consistent flows. It touches your face, your arms, your clothing, and you feel the difference immediately. You wrap your arms around yourself again. This time it feels necessary, not dramatic, just real. You keep walking your steps, creating soft sounds against the dry ground. After some time you notice something unusual, a thin layer across parts of the land ahead. You approach slowly, unsure at first what you're seeing. As you draw closer it becomes clearer. Frost, light, fragile, resting across the surface in delicate patterns. You stop. This should not be here. Not like this. You crouch and look closely. The frost clings to small plants to exposed soil, forming a thin crystalline layer that catches what little light remains. It is not thick, not covering everything, but its presence alone signals something significant. In many regions, frost appears seasonally, marking predictable cycles. But when it begins to appear unexpectedly, or in places where it was once rare, it suggests a shift in underlying climate patterns. You reach out and touch it. It melts almost instantly beneath your fingers, leaving a faint dampness that disappears just as quickly. You pull your hand back, watching the small patch where the frost has vanished. Then you look up again. The sky remains unchanged, pale, hazy, quiet, and yet beneath it the land has crossed a threshold. You stand slowly and continue walking. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer now, almost rigid in places. The slight give you felt earlier has lessened, replaced by a surface that holds its shape more firmly. You take a few more steps and notice something else. The absence of insects. Before, even as their numbers declined, you could still hear them faintly, a subtle background presence. Now that sound has faded almost completely, silence expands. You walk on listening. Nothing answers. The quiet becomes more complete. You move toward a shallow dip in the land, curious to see if moisture is collected there. When you arrive, you find a small patch of ground that appears darker, suggesting dampness. You kneel and press your hand against it. It is cold. Colder than expected. You push slightly deeper. The surface gives way just enough to reveal a thin layer beneath that feels almost frozen. Not solid ice, but close. You sit back slowly, your breath steady, but your awareness sharpened. This is no longer a subtle change. This is something new. A widely recognized conclusion among climate researchers is that abrupt cooling events can occur when large systems shift, suddenly altering temperature patterns across vast areas. These changes can happen over relatively short periods, sometimes within a few decades or less. You stand again, your body adjusting to the cooler air. You look across the land. The frost patches remain scattered, catching the light in faint glimmers. The plants stay low. The soil holds firm. The wind continues its steady movement. You begin walking once more, your pace unchanged, though your perception of the world has shifted. The warmth that once defined this place is no longer reliable. The balance is tilted. You feel it in every step, in every breath, in the way the air meets your skin and does not let go. You walk on deeper into a landscape that is no longer simply changing but transforming. The cooling has begun, and it will not stop easily. You continue forward, your breath, steady your steps, careful on the firming ground. The faint frost you saw before lingers behind you, yet its presence remains in your thoughts. It was delicate, almost fragile, but it marked something important. A line that has now been crossed. The air carries a clearer chill now. Not sudden, not sharp, but constant. It rests against your skin without fading, settling into your awareness in a way that feels steady and undeniable. You walk across another stretch of open land, and this time you notice the ground before you even step onto it. It looks different. Smoother, less varied. You move closer and slow your pace. Then you step onto it. The sensation is immediate. The ground does not give. It holds firm beneath your weight, resisting the slight pressure of your step. You pause and press down more deliberately, testing it. It remains solid, the surface tight and unyielding. You kneel and place your hand against it. Cold, more deeply cold than before. You push your fingers gently into the soil, but they do not sink as they once did. Instead, they meet resistance just beneath the surface, as though something below is locked into place. In colder climates, repeated freezing can cause the upper layers of soil to harden, limiting the movement of water and roots. This process can alter how plants grow, how animals move, and how the land itself behaves. You pull your hand back and sit for a moment, resting your arms loosely against your knees. The ground that once supported life with quiet flexibility is becoming rigid, less responsive, less alive in its movement. You stand again, brushing your hands lightly against your clothing, and continue walking. The wind moves steadily across the land, carrying a cooler presence now. It does not rush. It does not change direction as often. It flows in long, quiet currents that seem to stretch from one horizon to the other. You lift your gaze. The sky remains pale and distant, the haze still presents, softening the light. But the warmth is no longer there. You feel it clearly now. The sun shines, yet it does not reach you in the same way. You walk for some time without stopping. The land remains consistent in its new state. Patches of frost appear more frequently, especially in shaded areas or slight depressions. The soil holds firm across wider stretches. Vegetation clings low to the ground, reduced and cautious. Then you notice something else. Tracks. You approach slowly, your attention focused. They are there pressed into a thin layer of softened surface, but they are not fresh. The edges are slightly hardened, as though they have been preserved by the cold rather than erased by time. You crouch and examine them. They tell a story of movement, but not recent movement. Animals have passed here, but not today, perhaps not even yesterday. You look around, scanning the land. There is little motion. The stillness feels deeper now, not just quiet, but settled. In changing climates, animal movement often becomes less predictable. Some species migrate earlier or later than usual. Others reduce their range, concentrating in areas that still provide enough resources to survive. You stand and continue walking. After some time, you reach a gentle slope leading upward. You climb it slowly, your steps careful on the firmer ground. At the top you pause. From here you can see far across the landscape. And what you see confirms what you have been feeling. The ground stretches outward in wide pale tones. Frost marks appear like faint patterns across the surface. Vegetation is sparse, low and uneven. Movement is rare. You take a slow breath. The air feels sharper now as it enters your lungs, not painful but more noticeable. You release it slowly, watching as it fades into the cool air. You walk along the ridge, your path steady. As you move, you notice something near your feet. A small plant. You stop and crouch beside it. It is still alive, its leaves tightly drawn, its structure compact. You touch it gently, feeling the firmness of its form. It has adapted. In colder conditions, some plants reduce their size and exposure, conserving energy and protecting themselves from the elements. It is a quiet form of resilience, a way of continuing without expanding. You straighten and continue. The land around you feels quieter than ever. Even the wind seems to move with less sound, slipping across the surface without stirring much in response. You listen. There is almost nothing to hear. You walk on, your awareness deepening. The world is no longer in balance. It has shifted, and now it is settling into something new. You wrap your arms around yourself once more, this time holding them there a little longer. The cold is no longer distant. It is present. Steady. Persistent. You lower your arms and continue walking, each step carrying you deeper into a landscape where the ground has begun to harden, the air has begun to cool, and the familiar patterns of life are slowly giving way to something far less forgiving. You continue along the ridge, your steps measure your breath, slow and steady in the cooling air. The ground beneath you remains firm, almost unyielding, and each step lands with a quiet certainty that feels different from before. There is less softness now, less flexibility. The land holds itself tightly. You descend gradually, following the natural slope downward. As you move, your eyes begin to search the terrain ahead, not just for direction, but for signs of familiarity. Something recognizable. Something dependable. A path, perhaps. A route that once guided movement through this landscape. You spot one, faint. Barely visible at first, but clearer as you approach. It winds gently through the terrain, curving around small rises and dips shaped over time by repeated use. You follow it instinctively, allowing it to guide your steps. For a moment it feels reassuring. This path has been used before. Many times. It must lead somewhere. You walk along at your pace steady. The ground beneath the path is slightly more compacted than the surrounding soil, a result of repeated passage. But even here, something feels off. The edges of the path are less defined. In some places, it fades entirely, replaced by patches of hardened earth, where no clear direction remains. You slow. Looking ahead, the path continues for a short distance, then breaks apart completely. You stop. This should not happen. Paths form through consistency, through repetition, through movement that follows the same patterns over time. When those patterns break, the path disappears. You step forward cautiously, trying to pick up where it left off. You scan the ground, searching for any sign of continuation. But there is none, only scattered impressions, fragments of direction that do not connect. You stand still for a moment. This is what it means when the land begins to change beyond recognition. Roots that once led to water, to food, to shelter no longer hold their purpose. You turn slowly, looking around. The landscape offers no clear guidance. Everything feels open and uncertain. You take a slow breath and choose a direction not because you are certain, but because you must continue. In earlier times, early humans relied heavily on memory and repeated movement to navigate their environment. Knowledge of the land was built over years, even generations, forming a mental map that guided survival. When the environment shifts too quickly, that knowledge can lose its reliability. Some specialists in prehistoric life propose that sudden climate changes may have forced human groups to abandon familiar routes and explore new territories, often with limited information. Others suggest that adaptability rather than familiarity became the key to survival, allowing groups to respond more flexibly to changing conditions. You walk forward, your steps slower now, more deliberate. The ground remains firm beneath you, the cold more noticeable with each passing moment. The air presses lightly against your face, carrying a steady chill that no longer fades between breaths. You scan the horizon. There is no clear destination, only distance. You continue walking. After some time, you come across another set of tracks. You approach them carefully. They are faint but visible, pressed into a slightly softer patch of ground. You crouch and examine them. They move in a line, but not a confident one. The direction shifts slightly as though the one who made them was uncertain. You follow the line with your eyes. It leads forward, then veers, then continues again. You stand slowly. Even movement itself has become uncertain. You look ahead once more. The land stretches outward, pale and quiet. You take another step, then another. Your path now is not guided by memory or by clear signs, but by instinct and awareness. You listen as you walk. The silence is deeper here. The absence of sound feels almost complete, broken only by the soft rhythm of your own movement. No distant calls, no layered background of life. Just space. You stop briefly, letting the quiet settle around you. This is a different kind of stillness. Not peaceful, not empty, but suspended, as though the world is holding itself in a moment of transition. You take a slow breath and continue. The ground beneath you shows no sign of the path returning. No hint of the old routes. They are gone. Replaced by something new, something unmarked. You walk on, your awareness steady, your senses open. The world you move through is no longer shaped by repetition. It is shifting, and in that shift, everything familiar begins to fade. You continue forward without a defined path, your steps guided only by the shape of the land and your quiet sense of direction. The ground remains firm beneath you, and the cool air settles steadily around your body, no longer surprising, no longer new, but now part of the world you move through. The silence deepens. It is not empty, but it stretches wider, leaving long spaces between any sound that might break it. You walk toward a shallow basin ahead, where the land dips gently before rising again. From a distance, it looks like a place where water might gather, a natural collection point shaped over time by the movement of rain and soil. As you approach, you slow your pace. You expect to see some sign of moisture, a darker tone in the soil, a glimmer of reflected light. But as you draw closer, those expectations begin to fade. The basin is dry, completely. You step down into it, your feet pressing lightly against the surface. The ground here is smoother than the surrounding land, shaped by water that once flowed and settled in this place. You kneel and run your hand across it. It feels cool, but empty. You press your fingers down slightly. There is resistance almost immediately. Whatever moisture once filled this basin has long since disappeared, leaving behind only a hardened memory of its presence. In many prehistoric environments, small basins and seasonal pools played a crucial role in sustaining both plant and animal life. They acted as temporary reservoirs holding water long enough to support local ecosystems between rains. When those water sources begin to vanish even intermittently, the effects ripple outward quickly. You stand slowly and look around. There are faint marks along the edges of the basin. Tracks, old ones. They curve inward from multiple directions, suggesting that animals once came here regularly. But none of them appear recent. Their edges have been softened by time and wind, preserved just enough to tell a story. You follow one of the lines with your eyes. It leads down into the basin, then stops. There is no sign of return. You take a slow breath. The realization settles in quietly. This place no longer provides what it once did. You step out of the basin and continue walking, your gaze shifting across the landscape with greater care. You begin to notice more places like this, shallow depressions that show signs of past water but hold none now. Some are small, barely noticeable. Others are wider, more defined. All of them share the same absence. You walk toward one of the larger ones and stop at its edge. The ground slopes downward, smooth and pale. At the center, the surface is cracked in fine, intricate patterns, each line tracing the slow drying of what once filled the space. You step carefully into it. The cracks shift slightly beneath your weight, but they do not break apart. They hold. You crouch and place your hand against the surface. It feels colder here, more exposed. You trace one of the cracks lightly with your finger, following its path as it branches and divides. This is how water leaves the land. Not all at once, but slowly, gradually, until only the imprint remains. Some lines of research suggest that during rapid cooling events, changes in atmospheric circulation can reduce precipitation in certain regions, leading to extended dry periods even as temperatures fall. Other interpretations propose that shifting weather systems created uneven patterns, with some areas becoming wetter, while others experienced prolonged dryness. The exact pattern is still being studied, reconstructed from fragments left behind in soil ice and ancient sediments. You sit back slightly, resting your hands on your knees. The basin around you feels still, quiet, as though it is waiting for something that no longer comes. You stand and step out again, brushing the dust lightly from your hands. The wind moves across the open space, carrying fine particles with it. It sweeps over the basin without resistance, lifting small grains from the surface and carrying them outward. You watch for a moment. The dust rises, drifts, then settles again. You turn and continue walking. The land stretches on, but it no longer offers clear signs of where to go. Water, once a guiding force, is no longer visible in these places. You move across another stretch of open ground, your steps steady, your awareness focused. After some time, you notice something faint ahead, a narrow line cutting across the land. You approach it slowly. It is a riverbed, or what remains of one. You step down into it and pause. The shape is unmistakable. Smooth curves, gentle slopes, the worn edges of a path carved by water over long periods of time. But now it is empty. You walk along its length, your feet pressing into the fine pale sediment that has settled at the bottom. It feels soft on the surface, but beneath that it hardens quickly. You look up at the banks. They rise on either side, marking the space where water once moved freely. You imagine it, flowing, reflecting light, carrying life. Now it holds only silence. You continue walking along the dry channel for a short distance, then stop. There is no sound here, no movement, just the faint whisper of wind passing overhead. You take a slow breath. The absence of water is no longer occasional. It is becoming consistent. You step out of the riverbed and climb back onto the open land. From here you look out across the horizon once more. The patterns are clearer now. Basins without water, paths without direction, land without flow. You stand quietly for a moment. Then you begin to walk again, each step carrying you deeper into a world where one of the most essential elements of life has begun to disappear. You leave the dry riverbed behind, climbing back onto the open ground with slow, steady steps. The absence of water lingers in your thoughts, not as a single loss, but as part of a wider pattern that is becoming impossible to ignore. The air feels cooler again, not sharply so, but with a consistency that settles into your skin and remains there. You notice it in your breathing, in the way each inhale feels slightly thinner, slightly more deliberate. You walk across a stretch of land that feels increasingly exposed. The vegetation here is sparse, scattered in uneven patches that cling to the ground. Between them the soil stretches pale and open, shaped by wind and time. You pause for a moment and listen. The silence holds. Then faintly something breaks it. A sound, soft, irregular. You turn your head slowly, focusing on the direction. There it is again, movement. You begin to walk toward it, careful with each step, your attention fixed on the subtle rhythm of the sound. As you move closer, the source becomes clearer. Animals! A small group gathered near a shallow rise. You slow and stop at a distance, watching. Their behavior is different from what you saw before. They are not moving as a group in steady motion. Instead, they shift restlessly, pausing, turning, adjusting their position, as though uncertain. One lowers its head toward the ground, searching. Another steps forward, then back. A third moves slightly away from the others, then returns. There is no clear direction, no shared path. You remain still, observing. In stable environments, animal behavior often follows predictable patterns. Grazing, resting, migrating. These actions repeat with a rhythm shaped by the availability of food and water. Here that rhythm has begun to break. Some studies of animal response to environmental stress suggest that when familiar resources become unreliable, behavior can shift in noticeable ways. Animals may explore more widely, change feeding habits, or display signs of hesitation as they search for what they need. You watch as one of them lifts its head and looks outward. Not at you, but beyond, as though searching for something that is no longer there. The group begins to move again, but not together. They drift slightly apart, each taking a slightly different direction, before slowly reorienting toward one another. It is movement without certainty. You take a slow breath. The feeling settles in quietly. Even instinct is being tested. You step back slightly, giving them space, and continue on your way. The land ahead stretches open, marked by the same pale tones and scattered growth you've come to recognize. The wind moves steadily, carrying the now familiar dryness across the surface. As you walk, you begin to notice something else. Bones! At first just one, partially buried. You approach it slowly. It is small, weathered its surface, lightened by time and exposure. You crouch and look more closely. It has been here for some time, long enough for the edges to soften, for the ground to begin reclaiming it. You stand and continue walking. Then you see another, and another, scattered, not clustered in one place, but spread across the land in quiet intervals. Each one tells a similar story, not of sudden loss, but of gradual decline. You stop for a moment, looking across the open ground. This is not a place of immediate collapse. It is a place where survival has become more difficult, where not all can continue. Archaeological findings in various regions show that periods of environmental stress often coincide with changes in animal populations. Some species decline in number, others shift their range, and some disappear entirely from certain areas. The reasons are not always clear, and different regions tell different stories, but the pattern of change is consistent. You walk on your steps slower now. The wind passes over you, carrying a cooler edge. You wrap your arms around yourself, again holding them there for a moment longer than before. The cold is becoming familiar, not something you react to, something you carry. You lower your arms and continue. The ground beneath you remains firm, the surface marked occasionally by faint cracks or scattered frost. The vegetation stays low, cautious, holding close to the earth. You reach another slight rise and step up onto it. From here, the land stretches outward in all directions. You pause, looking. The patterns are clearer now. Animals moving without clear direction. Water sources gone. Bones scattered across the land. You take a slow breath. The air feels thin. Quiet. You release it slowly. There is no single moment where everything changes. No clear dividing line. Only this, a steady unraveling. You stand there for a while, letting the stillness settle around you. Then you turn and continue walking, each step carrying you deeper into a world where even the natural instincts of life are beginning to falter, and where survival is no longer guided by certainty, but by quiet, uncertain searching. You continue forward, your steps slower now, not from fatigue but from awareness. The land stretches quietly beneath you, pale and still, holding the marks of change in every direction you look. The cold settles more deeply into the air. It is no longer something you notice in passing. It remains with you, in your hands, in your breath, in the way the air meets your skin and stays there. You walk across another open stretch, your footsteps soft against the firm ground. The wind moves steadily, carrying a faint chill that no longer fades between moments. The light has changed again. It feels dimmer, not dark but muted, as though the warmth once carried within it has slowly drained away. You lift your gaze toward the sky. The haze remains, softening everything, blending the horizon into the air. It gives the world a quiet, distant quality, as if you are moving through something that has grown slightly removed from itself. You continue walking. After some time you notice the shadows. They stretch longer than they should, not dramatically, but enough that you pause. You look around. The position of the sun has not shifted significantly, yet the light seems to fade more quickly than expected. The transition between brightness and dimness feels slower, more drawn out. You stand still for a moment, letting the observation settle. Then you move on. In colder climatic phases, seasonal patterns can shift in subtle ways. The distribution of light across the day may feel different, influenced by atmospheric conditions and temperature changes. These shifts, while gradual, can alter the rhythm of daily life. You walk down a gentle slope into a shallow depression. The air feels colder here. It settles in the low space, lingering more heavily than on the higher ground. You notice it immediately, the way it gathers, as though the land itself is holding it in place. You exhale slowly. Your breath becomes visible, faint at first, then clearer. You stop, watching it. The small cloud forms, lingers briefly, then fades into the air. You take another breath. It appears again. This is new. You remain still for a moment longer, observing the quiet pattern. Then you continue walking. The ground beneath you shows more frequent signs of frost now. Thin layers appear across shaded areas, catching the dim light and reflecting it in soft, scattered patterns. You step carefully, your feet pressing lightly into the surface. The frost breaks beneath your weight with a faint sound. Soft, barely there, but present. You walk on listening. The silence has deepened further. It is no longer simply the absence of sound. It feels like a presence of its own, wide, unbroken. You reach another rise and climb it slowly. At the top you stop and look out. The land stretches endlessly. Muted, still. You search for movement. There is very little. In the distance you spot a small group of animals. They move slowly, closer together than before, their bodies angled inward as though seeking warmth from one another. You watch them for a moment. Their movement is minimal, measured. They do not spread out. They remain close. In colder conditions, animals often adjust their behavior to conserve heat and energy. Grouping together can reduce exposure, allowing them to endure longer periods of low temperature. You take a slow breath. The air feels sharper now as it enters your lungs. You release it, watching the faint cloud form and fade again. You continue walking. The ground beneath your feet grows more rigid as you move. The slight give that remained before is almost gone now, replaced by a surface that feels increasingly solid. You pass another patch of vegetation. It is low, compact, pressed close to the ground. You kneel and touch it. It feels firm, cold, its structure tight, conserving what little energy it can. You stand again and continue. The wind moves steadily across the land, but it carries less sound now. It passes over the surface without stirring much, as though there is less for it to move. You wrap your arms around yourself again. This time the gesture lingers. You hold it, not out of discomfort, but because it feels natural. You lower your arms slowly and keep walking. The light continues to fade gradually, not into darkness, but into a softer, dimmer state that stretches across the land. You begin to understand something. The nights are growing longer, not in a sudden way, but in a steady, almost unnoticeable progression. You feel it in the way the day seems to shorten, in the way the light fades more easily, in the way the cold holds on. You reach another open stretch and stop. The land around you feels suspended in this quiet transition, neither fully day nor fully night, just a slow shift between the two. You take a long, steady breath. The air feels cold, clear. You release it slowly. The faint cloud appears again, then disappears. You stand there for a moment longer, then you begin to walk again, each step carrying you deeper into a world where the rhythm of day and night is beginning to change, and where the cold is no longer a passing presence, but a constant companion. You continue walking as the dim light stretches across the land, neither fully bright nor fully fading. The air settled into a steady chill, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain. It simply remains. You feel it in your shoulders now, in the way your body holds itself a little tighter, not from fear, just from the quiet need to keep warmth close. The ground beneath you is firm and pale, carrying faint traces of frost that linger, even as the light rests upon them. You move carefully, your steps measured, your awareness tuned to every small change around you. After some time, the land begins to shift again. Ahead, you notice a formation of rocks rising slightly from the ground. Not large, not towering, but enough to break the open stretch of the landscape. They form a loose barrier, creating small pockets of shadow and shelter. You walk toward them. As you approach, the wind softens. The rocks interrupt its flow, creating a space where the air feels slightly calmer, slightly more still. You step into that space and pause. The difference is immediate. The cold remains, but the sharp edge of the wind is gone. You take a slow breath and let it settle. This is what shelter feels like here. Not warmth, but protection. You move between the rocks, noticing how they form natural boundaries. Some lean against each other, creating narrow gaps. Others stand alone, casting long shadows that stretch across the ground. You step into one of these shaded areas and crouch. The ground here feels slightly different. Still firm, still cold, but less exposed. You place your hand against it. The frost is thinner, the surface less rigid. It is a small difference, but it matters. In environments like this, even minor variations in exposure can create pockets where conditions are just enough to allow survival. Early humans would have learned to recognize these places, seeking them out when the open land became too harsh. You sit for a moment, letting the stillness surround you. The rocks hold the quiet in a different way. The wind no longer moves freely. The air feels contained. You listen. There is a faint sound nearby. You turn your head slightly. Movement. You remain still, allowing your eyes to adjust. Then you see them, a small group of early humans. They're gathered within another cluster of rocks not far from you, partially hidden by the uneven terrain. Their movements are slow, deliberate, their bodies close together. You watch quietly. They are not resting fully, not relaxed, but conserving energy. One adjusts their position, pulling something closer around their shoulders. Another leans slightly toward the center of the group, reducing the space between them. This is how warmth is shared, not through abundance, but through closeness. Ethnographic studies of traditional hunter-gatherer societies suggest that communal behavior becomes especially important in colder conditions. Sharing body heat, coordinating movement, and maintaining proximity can all increase the chances of enduring harsh environments. You observe them carefully. There is a structure to their arrangement, not formal, but intentional. The youngest remain closer to the center. The others form a loose outer layer. It is quiet, no sudden movement, no unnecessary action. You notice something else. Near the center of their group, there is a small darkened patch on the ground. You recognize it. A fire site, not active at this moment, but used recently. You look around. There are small pieces of material gathered nearby. Dry fragments carefully placed ready to be used. Fire in conditions like this becomes more than a tool. It becomes a necessity. Archaeological evidence indicates that the controlled use of fire was well established by this period, providing warmth protection and the ability to process food more efficiently. It also extended the hours of activity into the darker parts of the day. You shift your weight slightly, remaining as quiet as possible. The group does not notice you, or if they do not react. Their focus remains inward. on warmth, on survival. You slowly stand and step back, giving them space. You understand now. The open land is no longer where safety lies. It is in places like this. Small, protected, hidden from the wind. You move away from the rocks and continue walking. As you step back into the open, the wind returns immediately, brushing against you with its steady chill. You wrap your arms around yourself again, feeling the contrast between shelter and exposure. The difference is clear. You walk on, scanning the landscape. Now you see it more easily. Other formations, other places where shelter might be found. You realize that movement itself has changed. It is no longer about following paths or searching widely. It is about finding these spaces, these small interruptions in the land where the cold is just a little less. You continue forward, your pace steady. The light dims further, though not into darkness, just into a softer, more distant glow. The world feels quieter than ever, but not empty. You carry with you the image of the group among the rocks. The way they gathered, the way they endured. You take a slow breath. The air is cold, but you understand now. Survival here is no longer about abundance. It is about holding on, finding shelter, staying close, and continuing one quiet step at a time. You move on from the shelter of the rocks, carrying with you the quiet image of the group gathered close together. The wind returns as soon as you step back into the open, brushing steadily against your face and hands, reminding you how exposed the land has become. The cold no longer surprises you. It stays, it settles. It becomes part of how you move. You walk across a wide open stretch where the ground remains firm and pale, marked here and there by thin layers of frost that catch the dim light. The sky above holds its soft haze, muting everything beneath it. After some time, you begin to notice signs of presence again. Not movement, but traces, subtle. You slow your pace and look more closely at the ground. There are impressions here. Not fresh, but not as old as the ones you saw before. They overlap slightly, forming a loose pattern that suggests repeated activity in this area. You follow them. They lead toward a slight rise in the land where a cluster of stones and low vegetation creates a natural boundary. As you approach, you become more aware of the space. There is a stillness here, but not emptiness. You move carefully, stepping around the edge of the formation rather than directly into it. Then you see them. Another group, larger than the one you saw before. They are gathered in a shallow hollow, partially shielded from the wind. Their movements are slow and deliberate, their bodies arranged in a loose circle. You remain at a distance watching. This time there is more activity, not hurried, but purposeful. One individual kneels near the center, adjusting something on the ground. Another moves slowly around the edge, collecting small pieces of material, placing them carefully in a pile. You notice their faces. Focused, quiet. There is no unnecessary movement. Every action seems measured. In conditions like these, energy must be conserved. Even simple tasks are performed with care, avoiding wasted effort. Observations from prehistoric sites suggest that during periods of environmental stress, daily routines often became more structured with less room for variation or excess. You shift slightly, finding a position where you can observe without being seen. The group begins to settle. They move closer together, forming a tighter circle. One person reaches toward the center, and after a moment a small flame appears. Fire. It starts quietly, a faint glow. Then it grows slightly, casting a soft flickering light across the faces around it. You watch as the group leans in, not close enough to disturb it, but close enough to feel its warmth. This is not a large fire, not one meant for cooking or display. It is controlled, careful, used with intention. Some researchers emphasize that fire use during colder periods became more strategic, with smaller, more efficient fires used to conserve fuel while still providing essential warmth. Others suggest that the availability of burnable material may have limited how often larger fires could be sustained. You observe how they interact with it. One adjusts the fuel, slowly adding only what's needed. Another extends their hands toward the warmth, holding them there, then pulling them back. The group remains quiet. There is no visible conversation, only presence, shared. You notice something else. Their arrangement. It is not random. There is a subtle order to where each person sits. Those closest to the center appear to be protected by the others who form a loose outer layer. The positioning shifts slightly over time as individuals adjust, but the pattern remains. This is not accidental. It is learned, passed down, refined through experience. You remain still watching. Time passes quietly. The light continues to dim, though not fully into night. The fire becomes more visible as the surrounding brightness softens its glow, steady and contained. You take a slow breath. The air feels colder now, away from the fire, more noticeable in contrast. You wrap your arms around yourself again, holding them there for a moment. Then you lower them. The group remains focused on the center, on the fire, on each other. You begin to understand something deeper. This is not just survival. It is coordination, decision, choice. At some point they gathered here. At some point they chose this place. And they chose it together. Some anthropologists suggest that during challenging environmental periods, group cohesion may have played a crucial role in human survival, allowing individuals to share knowledge, resources, and protection. Others point out that smaller groups may also have formed adapting in different ways depending on the landscape and available resources. You step back slowly, careful not to disturb the scene. The fire continues to burn quietly behind you. The group remains close, their presence steady in the growing dimness. You turn and walk away. The wind meets you again as you leave the sheltered hollow, carrying the same cold, steady presence across the land. But something has changed, not in the environment, but in your understanding of it. You walk on your steps calm. The world is no longer a place of individual movement. It is becoming a place where survival depends on shared decisions, on quiet cooperation, on gathering together in the face of a changing earth. And as you move forward, you carry that awareness with you, step by step, into the deepening cold. You leave the quiet circle of fire behind you, the faint glow fading as you move back into the open land. The wind meets you again, steady and cold, pressing lightly against your body, as if reminding you where you are. The air feels thinner now, not empty, but stripped of something it once held. You continue forward, your steps calm and deliberate. The ground remains firm beneath you, the frost more frequent, the patches of exposed soil wider and more connected. The landscape stretches out in long pale tones. There are fewer interruptions now, fewer signs of shelter. You walk for some time without seeing anything that breaks the pattern. Then slowly the land begins to change. It rises, not sharply, but enough to form a gentle incline that draws your attention. You move toward it, your pace steady, your breath visible in faint clouds that form and disappear with each exhale. As you climb, the wind grows stronger. It moves more freely here, sweeping across the higher ground without resistance. It carries dust and cold together, brushing against your face and hands. You reach the top and stop. From here, the view stretches farther than before, and what you see feels different. The land ahead is more open, more empty. The patches of vegetation grow smaller, more scattered. The ground appears smoother, less varied, as though the details that once filled it have been worn away. You stand still for a moment. Then you begin to descend on the other side. The ground slopes downward into a wide expanse that feels unfamiliar, not because it is new, but because it lacks the features you have come to rely on. There are no clear signs of water, no visible shelter, no paths, only distance. You walk into it. The silence deepens again, stretching across the space in a way that feels almost complete. The wind moves steadily, carrying a constant low sound that replaces everything else. You continue forward. After some time, you notice movement. Far ahead, you narrow your gaze, focusing. A line, faint at first, then clearer. A group of early humans. You slow your pace and approach, carefully keeping your distance. They are moving together, not gathered, not resting. Moving, their steps are steady, their bodies angled forward, their direction clear. You watch them closely. This is different from the groups you have seen before. There is no circle, no fire, no pause, only movement. You follow at a distance, observing. Their formation is loose but coordinated. They do not cluster tightly, but they remain close enough to stay connected. Each person maintains a rhythm that matches the others. There is purpose here, not urgency, but decision, At some point they chose to leave, to move away from where they were, towards something unknown. Migration has always been part of human survival. Early groups often moved in response to changing seasons, following resources and adjusting their location as needed. But when environmental conditions shift more dramatically, these movements can become longer, less predictable, and more necessary. You watch their steps. They do not hesitate, even when the land offers no clear guidance, even when the direction ahead holds no visible promise. They continue. Some research suggests that during periods of rapid climate change, human populations may have expanded into new regions, adapting to unfamiliar environments in order to survive. Other interpretations propose that some groups retreated to smaller, more stable areas, reducing their range rather than extending it. The exact patterns remain a subject of ongoing study. You continue following them at a distance. The wind presses steadily against all of you, carrying the same cold, the same dryness across the land. One member of the group pauses briefly, turning slightly as if checking the direction. Then they continue. No words, no visible signal, just movement. You notice their pace. It is consistent, not rushed, not slow, maintained. This is how distance is crossed, step by step, without interruption. You walk with them for some time, keeping your space. The land remains unchanged around you, open, pale, endless. Then gradually the group begins to shift direction. Not sharply, but enough that you notice. They angle slightly toward a distant rise, barely visible through the haze. You follow their line of sight. There is something there, not clear, not defined, but different. You continue walking, your attention fixed ahead. The group moves toward it without hesitation. Whatever lies there, they have chosen it. Or perhaps it is simply the next possibility. You take a slow breath. The air feels cold in your lungs. You release it, watching the faint cloud form and fade. Then you continue forward. The land behind you fades into memory. The land ahead remains uncertain, but the movement continues, steady, quiet, unbroken. And you walk with it deeper into a world where staying is no longer an option, and where survival depends on the courage to leave what is known behind. You continue moving across the open land, keeping a quiet distance from the group ahead. Their figures remain steady against the pale horizon, small but constant like markers, guiding you through an uncertain world. The ground beneath your feet feels increasingly bare. The scattered patches of vegetation have thinned even further, leaving long stretches of exposed soil that carry the faint imprint of wind and cold. Your steps leave only the lightest trace now, the surface too firm to hold much memory of your passing. The air moves steadily, colder, more direct. It no longer shifts in gentle patterns. It travels across the land in long, uninterrupted flows, brushing past everything without resistance. You walk on. The distant rise the group is heading toward begins to take shape, though only slightly. It remains softened by the haze, its edges blurred, its details hidden. Between you and it lies a wide expanse of land that feels almost empty. You begin to notice something as you cross it. The ground changes in texture, not suddenly, but enough that you slow your pace. In some areas the surface appears slightly broken, small fragments of hardened soil scattered across the top like pieces that no longer hold together. In others, the ground seems smoother, almost polished by wind that has passed over it again and again. You crouch briefly, touching the surface. It feels dry, cold, and loose in places. You lift your hand and watch as fine grains cling to your skin before falling away. Without consistent plant cover, soil becomes more vulnerable to erosion. Over time, wind can reshape the surface, carrying away finer particles and leaving behind a harder, more compacted layer beneath. You stand and continue walking. The group ahead maintains its pace. They do not stop. They do not turn. Their movement remains steady, their direction unchanged. You follow your own steps, falling into a similar rhythm. Time passes quietly. The light remains dim, the sky unchanged, the cold constant. Then you begin to notice something else. The land is becoming flatter, more uniform. The small variations in elevation that once guided your movement have faded, replaced by a surface that stretches outward with little interruption. You pause for a moment looking around. There are fewer landmarks now, fewer signs to orient yourself, only distance. You take a slow breath and continue. The group ahead begins to spread slightly, not separating completely, but allowing more space between each individual. Their formation adjusts to the terrain, adapting without hesitation. You watch them closely. Their steps remain measured, their posture steady. They conserve energy. In harsh environments, efficient movement becomes essential. Covering distance without unnecessary strain can make the difference between continuing and stopping. Observations from modern hunter-gatherer societies show that walking patterns often reflect this balance, maintaining a pace that can be sustained over long periods. You continue following your awareness focused. The rise ahead grows closer. Its shape becomes clearer. It is not a sharp formation, more of a broad elevation rising gently from the surrounding land. As you approach, the ground begins to change again. Small stones appear more frequently scattered across the surface. The soil becomes slightly less uniform, broken by these interruptions. You step carefully, adjusting your footing. The wind shifts slightly as you near the base of the rise, moving in more varied patterns as it encounters the uneven terrain. You feel it against your face, your hands. Still cold, still steady, but altered. The group begins to climb. Their pace slows just slightly, but their movement remains continuous. You follow at a distance, stepping onto the incline. The ground here feels more stable, the presence of stones providing a different kind of support beneath your feet. You climb slowly. The cold air presses more firmly against you as the wind moves more freely across the higher ground. You reach the top and pause. The group continues forward, but you stop for a moment, taking in what lies ahead. The view opens, and what you see feels even more distant from the world you began in. The land stretches outward in pale tones, broken only by occasional patches of low growth and scattered stone. The haze remains, softening everything, blending sky and earth into a quiet, endless expanse. You take a slow breath. The air feels colder here, more exposed. You release it, watching the faint cloud form and fade. Then you look ahead again. The group continues moving. Their figures small, steady, unwavering. You begin walking again, following them into this wide open space. The world behind you feels far away now. The forests, the rivers, the abundance, all replaced by this. A land that offers little. A land that requires movement. You walk on your steps, calm your awareness steady. The journey continues, and with each step, the distance between what once was and what now remains grows wider. You follow the group down from the rise and into the wide expanse beyond your steps, steady, your breath visible in the cooling air. The land ahead stretches farther than before, open in a way that feels almost endless. There's very little here to guide you. No trees, no flowing water, only scattered stones and low patches of growth that cling close to the ground. The wind moves without interruption, sweeping across the surface in long, quiet currents. It carries the cold with it, steady and unchanging. You walk on. The group ahead continues at the same measured pace, their movements consistent, their direction fixed. They do not pause, do not gather, do not turn back. You begin to notice how they move. Each step is placed carefully, no wasted motion, no sudden shifts. Their bodies remain relaxed but controlled, conserving energy with every movement. You find yourself adjusting your own pace to match theirs. Slower, more even, less strain. In environments where resources are limited, efficiency becomes essential. Movement must be sustainable over long distances, and every action must serve a purpose. Observations of traditional survival patterns show that conserving energy often becomes just as important as finding food. You continue walking your body, gradually adapting to the rhythm. The cold no longer feels like an interruption. It feels constant, something you carry rather than resist. After some time, the group begins to change its behavior, not stopping, but adjusting. They spread slightly, increasing the distance between each person. Their formation shifts, becoming less compact, allowing them to cover more ground visually. You watch carefully. This is not random. They are searching. You follow their movement with your eyes. Each individual scans the land as they walk their gaze, moving slowly across the surface, pausing briefly at anything that breaks the pattern. You begin to do the same, looking not just ahead, but around. The land offers very little, but even here there are signs. You notice a small cluster of plants slightly denser than the surrounding area. One of the group members moves toward it, crouching briefly. They examine it, touch it, then stand and continue. Not useful, or not enough. You walk on. After a while, another person pauses, bending slightly toward the ground. They remain there for a moment longer, then stand again, their movement calm, unhurried. You begin to understand this is not searching for abundance. It is searching for anything. Anything that can be used, anything that can sustain. You continue walking, your awareness expanding. The ground beneath your feet feels different now. In some places it is smooth and firm. In others it is broken by small stones or thin cracks that trace across the surface. You step carefully, adjusting to each change. The wind continues its steady movement, carrying the cold across the land. You wrap your arms around yourself briefly, then lower them again. Your body is adapting, slowly, without thought. You walk on, time passes quietly. The group maintains its pace. The land remains unchanged. Then something shifts. Not in the environment, but in behavior. One of the group stops. Not briefly, but fully. You slow and watch. Others notice. They adjust their direction slightly, moving toward that point. You approach carefully, keeping your distance. The person kneels, brushing away a thin layer of dust from the ground. You lean slightly to see. Beneath it, something is revealed. A root. Small, partially exposed. They reach down and pull gently. It comes free with effort, its surface pale and firm. Food. Not much, but something. You watch as they hold it for a moment, then place it carefully into a small container. The group does not celebrate. There is no visible reaction, only acknowledgement. Then they continue. This is how survival works now, not through large discoveries, but through small ones, repeated, steady. You follow your steps calm. The cold air fills your lungs as you breathe. You release it slowly. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You look across the land again. It still feels empty, but now you see it differently, not as absence, but as challenge. You continue walking. The group spreads out again, scanning the ground, moving with quiet focus. You do the same. Your eyes search. Your steps slow when something catches your attention. You pause, look, then move on. This is learning, not through instruction, but through observation, through repetition, through need. You walk on your body, adjusting your mind quiet. The world around you remains cold, dry, still, but within it there is movement, purpose, adaptation. You take a slow breath. The air feels sharp. You release it and continue, step by step, into a life where survival is no longer given but learned with every moment that passes. You continue walking alongside the group, your movements now quieter, more deliberate, shaped by the rhythm they have settled into. The land stretches pale and open in every direction. The wind steady the cold, no longer surprising but constant. Your breath forms faint clouds with each exhale. You notice it less now. It has become part of the background, like the wind, like the silence. The group ahead begins to slow, not stopping completely but reducing their pace as the light continues to fade into a dim, even tone. The sky remains pale, but the sense of day feels distant now, stretched thin across the horizon. One by one they begin to gather, not in a tight circle at first but closer than before. You slow as well, watching. They have chosen a place. There is no obvious shelter here, no rocks to break the wind, no rise in the land to offer protection. Just a slightly uneven patch of ground where the soil dips just enough to reduce exposure. It is enough. You stop at a distance, observing as they begin to prepare. Their movements are calm, familiar. One person kneels and begins clearing the ground, brushing away frost and loose dust with steady, practiced motions. Another gathers small pieces of dry material from nearby, moving, carefully selecting only what can be used. You watch the process unfold. It is precise, nothing wasted, Fire in this environment is no longer optional, it is central. Archaeological findings suggest that as climates cooled, the reliance on fire increased significantly. It provided warmth, light, and the ability to make otherwise inedible food sources more digestible. It also offered protection during long cold periods of darkness. You see how they handle it. Carefully, deliberately. The materials they gather are small, dry, chosen for how easily they will catch and sustain flame. One person kneels at the center and begins the process. It takes time. There is no sudden ignition, only repeated motion, controlled, patient, then slowly a spark. You lean slightly forward watching. It catches, faint at first, then growing. A small flame appears fragile but alive. The group shifts closer, not crowding, but surrounding. Each person adjusts their position, forming a loose circle once again, but this time with a clearer purpose. The fire becomes the center of everything. You feel the difference immediately. Even from a distance, the warmth reaches you faint but noticeable against the steady cold of the air. You step slightly closer, carefully. The heat touches your hands, your face. It does not remove the cold, but it softens it. You pause, letting the sensation settle. The group remains quiet, their attention fixed on the flame. One person feeds it carefully, adding just enough to sustain it without overwhelming it. Another extends their hands toward it, holding them there, then drawing them back. The movement is slow, repeated, almost rhythmic. You notice how they position themselves. Those closest to the fire remain there for a time, then shift slightly, allowing others to move in. It is not spoken. It does not need to be. It is understood, shared. Some observations from ethnographic studies note that fire often becomes a focal point not only for warmth, but for social coordination, shaping how groups gather rest and interact during colder periods. You watch as the light from the flame flickers across their faces. It creates soft movement in the shadows, a quiet contrast to the stillness of the land around them. The wind continues to move across the open space, but here within the circle its presence feels reduced. Not gone, but lessened. The fire holds a small space against it. You step a little closer again. The warmth is clearer now. You extend your hands slightly, feeling the difference. It is enough to matter. You lower them slowly. The group remains focused. There is no excess, no distraction, only the steady maintenance of the flame. You begin to understand something more clearly. Fire is not just warmth, it is control. In a world that is becoming colder, less predictable, it is one of the few elements that can be shaped, sustained, and relied upon. You sit quietly at the edge of the circle, keeping your distance, observing. The flame continues to burn, steady, contained. The light around you dims further, though not fully into darkness. The fire becomes the brightest point in the landscape, drawing everything inward. You take a slow breath. The air beyond the circle feels cold. Inside it feels different, balanced. You release your breath slowly, watching it fade into the glow. The group remains in place. The fire continues, and you sit there aware that in this changing world, survival is no longer just about movement or searching. It is about holding on to what can be kept, protecting it, maintaining it, and gathering around it quietly as the cold deepens beyond the light. You remain near the fading circle of warmth, watching as the fire settles into a steady glow. The group stays gathered, their movements slow and careful, each person adjusting slightly to share the heat without disturbing the flame. The cold presses in from beyond the light. You feel the difference clearly now. Inside the circle, the air feels balanced. Outside, it feels sharper, more present. You take a slow breath and let it go, watching the faint cloud drift and disappear. The rhythm of breathing has become something you notice more often, as though your body is quietly adapting to the air around you. After some time, the group begins to shift again, not leaving, but adjusting. One person stands slowly, stretching slightly, then stepping a short distance away from the fire. Others follow in small intervals, not all at once, but gradually. You watch closely. Their movements are not random. Each action feels considered, shaped by experience rather than impulse. You rise as well, stepping back from the warmth, letting the cold meet you again. It settles quickly, reminding you how dependent everything has become on that small source of heat. You look around. The land remains still. The sky holds its pale tone. The wind continues its steady movement. But something else has changed. You begin to notice it not in the environment but in the people, their bodies, their movements, the way they carry themselves. They appear slightly more compact in posture, their shoulders drawn in, their limbs held closer to the body. It is subtle but consistent. You realize this is not just a response to the moment. It is becoming a pattern. Over time, repeated exposure to colder environments can influence how the human body adapts. Some changes are immediate, such as conserving heat by reducing exposed surface area. Others may develop across generations, shaping physical traits that better suit the conditions. You watch as one individual adjusts a covering around their shoulders, pulling it tighter, securing it with careful hands. The material appears simple, likely made from animal hide, shaped to retain warmth. The design is practical, not decorative, focused entirely on function. You notice how they move within it. Their steps are measured, their motions efficient, avoiding unnecessary exposure. You begin to walk slowly around the edge of the group, observing from different angles. Each person carries something. Not much, but enough. Small tools, bundles, items that can be transported easily. Mobility remains essential. You understand now that staying in one place cannot last long. Even with fire, even with cooperation, the land does not support permanence. You pause and watch as one person kneels again near the fire, adjusting the remaining fuel. The flame responds, rising slightly, then settling once more. There is a quiet understanding in how it is handled. Careful, attentive. Fire must be maintained, not just created. You take another slow breath. The air feels cold again, though less surprising than before. Your body has begun to accept it. Not fully, but enough. You look outward across the land. It remains unchanged in its stillness. But within that stillness, life continues to adjust, to respond, to endure. Some lines of research suggest that early human populations developed a range of adaptive strategies during colder periods, including changes in clothing, shelter use and daily activity patterns. These adjustments allowed them to persist in environments that would otherwise be difficult to survive. You walk a short distance away from the group, then turn back. From here you can see them more clearly as a whole. A small cluster of movement in a wide, silent landscape. The fire at the centre, the bodies arranged around it, the slow, deliberate actions. You begin to understand something deeper. Adaptation is not a single moment. It is not a sudden change. It is a process. Quiet, gradual, built through repetition, through observation, through necessity. You step back toward the group, once more drawn by the faint warmth that still lingers. You extend your hands, briefly feeling the heat against your skin. Then you lower them. The flame continues to flicker steady and contained. The group remains calm, their presence grounded in the moment. You take a slow breath and release it. The cold air surrounds you, but you no longer react to it in the same way. You have adjusted, slightly, just as they have. You stand there for a moment longer, watching the quiet balance between fire and cold, between movement and stillness. Then you begin to walk again, carrying with you the understanding that survival here is not about resisting change. It is about becoming part of it. You move away from the circle of fire, the faint warmth fading with each step, until the cold settles fully around you once more. The land stretches out in its familiar stillness, pale and quiet, shaped now by patterns that no longer surprise you. Your steps feel steady, measured. You no longer rush. There is no reason to. The world has slowed and you move with it. Ahead, the group begins to gather again, but this time in a slightly different way. They do not form a tight circle immediately. Instead, they settle into a looser arrangement, their bodies angled inward, but with more space between them. You approach carefully, stopping at a distance where you can observe without disturbing the quiet. The fire has been rekindled, smaller than before, lower. It burns with a steady glow, its light soft against the dim surroundings. The group sits around it, not speaking, not moving much, just present. You sit as well, just beyond the edge, letting the warmth reach you in faint waves. The air carries a different feeling now, not just cold, but stillness layered with something else, a quiet sense of pause. This is not movement, not searching. This is time spent without action. And in that stillness, something begins to happen. One person leans slightly forward, their hands moving slowly as they hold a small object. You watch closely. A tool, simple, shaped carefully. They turn it in their hands, adjusting it, refining its edge with slow, precise motions. Another person watches, then reaches for their own piece. Soon, several of them are doing the same, working quietly, focused. In environments where survival depends on limited resources, tools become essential. Stone implements used for cutting, scraping, and shaping allowed early humans to process food, prepare hides, and adapt to changing conditions. You observe how they work. There is no wasted movement. Each action is deliberate. They do not rush. They do not repeat unnecessarily. It is careful, intentional. Some studies of prehistoric toolmaking suggest that knowledge was shared through observation and imitation rather than direct instruction. Skills were passed down by watching, by practicing, by repeating small actions until they became familiar. You notice a younger member of the group. They sit slightly apart at first, watching the others. Then slowly they begin to imitate the movements. Not perfectly, but carefully. Their hands move with uncertainty at first, then with growing confidence. You watch this exchange, quiet, unspoken, learning without words. You shift your gaze to the fire. Its light flickers, gently reflecting off the surfaces of the tools, the hands, the ground. It creates small patterns of movement in an otherwise still world. You take a slow breath. The air feels cold beyond the warmth, but within the circle there is balance. You begin to understand something else. Fire's not only warmth, it creates time. Without it, the cold and darkness would limit activity. With it, there is space for more than just survival. There is space to prepare, to learn, to pass on knowledge. You look around the group again. Their faces remain calm, focused. There is no urgency here, only continuation. You notice another small detail. One individual reaches into a small bundle and removes a piece of material. They examine it briefly, then place it near the fire, not directly into it, but close enough to warm. You watch. After a moment, they take it back, adjusting it with their hands, perhaps softening it, preparing it. Some evidence from prehistoric sites suggests that early humans used fire not only for warmth and cooking, but also to treat materials such as wood or hide, making them more workable and durable. You shift slightly, settling into the stillness. Time passes quietly. The group continues their work. The fire remains steady. The cold presses in from beyond the circle. But here within this small space there is something else. Continuity. You look outward across the land. It remains unchanged, silent, pale. Then you look back to the group. Their movements, their focus, their presence. You begin to understand that survival is not only about finding resources or enduring the cold. It is about maintaining knowledge, keeping it alive, passing it forward. Even in a world that is becoming harder, less predictable. You take another slow breath. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You sit for a moment longer. Then you stand. The group continues without interruption, their quiet work ongoing. You step away, the warmth fading again as you return to the open land. The cold meets you once more, but you carry something with you now, an understanding of how life continues, not through sudden change, but through small steady acts repeated over time. You walk on, each step calm, each breath steady, moving deeper into a world where survival is shaped not only by the land, but by what is learned and remembered within it. You leave the quiet circle behind once more, the glow of the fire fading into the distance until it becomes just another memory carried with you. The land opens again wide and pale, stretching beneath a sky that feels distant and still. Your steps remain steady. You have learned the rhythm now, not rushing, not hesitating, simply continuing. The cold moves with you, constant and familiar. It settles into your breathing, into the way your body holds itself, into the quiet awareness that accompanies each step. You walk for a long time without interruption. The ground remains firm. The wind continues its steady path. The silence deepens. And then gradually something shifts. Not in what you see, but in what you feel. A subtle weight. a quiet understanding. You slow your pace slightly, your gaze moving across the horizon. There is very little movement, very little sound. The world feels stretched thin. You stop for a moment, standing still, listening. Nothing answers. You take a slow breath. The air feels colder, now sharper as it enters your lungs. You release it slowly. The faint cloud appears, then disappears. You continue walking. After some time, you notice a small rise ahead, barely visible through the haze. You move toward it, your steps calm, your attention focused. As you climb, the wind grows slightly stronger, brushing past you in steady currents. You reach the top and stop. From here, the land opens in every direction, and what you see carries a quiet realization. There is so little left. Not nothing, but less. Far less than before. You scan the landscape carefully. You search for movement. You search for signs of life, and you find them, but they are distant, scattered, a small group far to one side, a single figure moving slowly across another stretch. Nothing concentrated, nothing abundant. You stand still, letting the view settle into your awareness. This is what it means to reach the edge. Not a clear boundary, not a sudden end, but a gradual thinning, a point where survival becomes uncertain. Some researchers examining ancient population patterns suggest that during severe climatic shifts, human numbers may have dropped significantly in certain regions. These declines were not always sudden, but could occur over extended periods as resources became harder to find. You take a slow breath. The air feels cold, empty. You release it slowly. You begin to walk again, descending from the rise. The ground remains unchanged beneath you. Firm, pale, quiet. You move across another stretch of land, your steps steady, your awareness deep. After some time, you notice something ahead. A figure. Alone. You approach slowly, keeping your distance. They move carefully, their steps slower than the group you followed before. Their posture is slightly lowered, their movements deliberate. You watch. They stop. Look around, then continue. There is effort in their movement, more than before. You follow at a distance, observing. This is what it looks like when survival becomes narrow. Not impossible, but difficult. Every step matters. Every decision carries weight. You walk on your own steps, quiet. The wind continues its steady motion. The cold remains. The silence stretches. You begin to understand something deeper. The world has not ended. It has changed, and in that change, the margin for survival has grown smaller. You stop for a moment, looking out across the land once more. There is life, but it is fragile, scattered. Holding on, you take a slow breath. The air feels thin. You release it. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You continue walking. Each step carries you forward into a world that has reached a critical point, a place where survival is no longer certain for all. A place where only those who adapt, who endure, who continue to move and learn will remain. You walk on, calm, steady, aware. The land stretches endlessly, and within it life continues, but only just. You continue forward, your steps slow and steady, your breath quiet in the cold air. The land stretches out in every direction, pale and still, holding the same patterns you have come to recognize. But something has shifted. Not in what surrounds you, but in how you understand it. You walk across the firm ground, your feet pressing lightly against the surface that no longer yields. The frost appears more frequently now, forming thin layers that catch the dim light and reflect it in faint, scattered patterns. The wind moves steadily, carrying the same dry chill across the land. You lift your gaze toward the sky. It remains pale, hazy, unchanging. And yet it feels like the source of everything. You slow your pace. Your attention turns upward. You begin to consider what has brought the world to this point. The cold, the dryness, the fading of life. It did not begin here in the small details you have been observing. It began somewhere larger, something that shaped everything at once. You walk on your thoughts, moving with your steps. Many climate researchers point to a sudden disruption in global systems during this period, one that altered temperatures across vast regions. Around 12,900 years ago, conditions shifted rapidly in what is now known as the Younger Dryas, bringing colder and drier climates to large parts of the northern hemisphere. You pause for a moment, Looking out across the land, it's difficult to imagine something so vast, something that reaches beyond what you can see, yet its effects are here, in every step, in every breath. You continue walking. Some scientific interpretations suggest that massive amounts of fresh water entered the oceans during this time, likely from melting ice sheets. This influx may have disrupted ocean currents that help regulate temperature, leading to a rapid cooling effect. You look ahead. The land remains unchanged, quiet, still. You take a slow breath. Other explanations have also been proposed. Some researchers have explored the possibility of an external event such as a comet impact contributing to the sudden shift. Evidence for this idea remains debated, with some findings supporting it and others challenging its validity. You walk on. The ground beneath you feels firm, unmoving. You begin to understand that the exact cause may not be clear. What matters is the result. The world has changed, and everything within it must respond. You pass another stretch of open land, your steps steady, your awareness calm. The wind continues its quiet movement. The cold remains. You look outward again. There is life, but it is sparse, scattered, holding on in small, quiet ways. Some scholars examining this period note that environmental changes often occur through complex interactions between multiple systems rather than a single event. Shifts in temperature, precipitation, and atmospheric conditions can combine, reinforcing each other over time. You slow your pace again. Your gaze moves across the horizon. The haze in the sky, the frost on the ground, the absence of water, the thinning of life, all connected. You take a slow breath. The air feels cold, clear. You release it slowly. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You continue walking. There is a sense now that you are not just moving through the world. You are moving through its transformation. You pass another shallow basin, dry and silent. You do not stop this time. You already understand what you will find. You walk on, your steps steady, your awareness deep. You begin to reflect on how small changes can grow. A slight shift in temperature, a reduction in rainfall, a change in wind patterns. Each one alone might seem minor, but together they reshape everything. You look up once more. The sky remains distant, unchanging, yet it holds the key to all of it. You take another slow breath. The cold settles around you. You release it and continue, step by step, through a world that has been altered by forces far beyond what you can see, yet fully present in everything you feel. You keep moving across the quiet expanse, your steps calm, your breathing steady in the cold air. The land feels familiar now in its stillness, yet your understanding of it has deepened. You no longer see it as empty. You see it as changed. You walk for a while without stopping, letting the rhythm carry you forward. The wind continues its steady passage, and the pale light rests gently across the ground. Your thoughts return to the cause of all this, not with urgency, but with quiet curiosity. You look up at the sky again. It gives nothing away, only that same muted brightness, that same distant calm. And yet the answers must lie in systems far beyond what you can observe directly. Researchers who study ancient climates often rely on fragments left behind in the Earth itself. Layers of ice, trapped air, bubbles, patterns in sediment. Even tiny grains of pollen can reveal changes in temperature and environment across thousands of years. You walk on, letting that idea settle. The world keeps its records quietly, hidden, waiting to be read. Some interpretations of this period suggest that the shift into colder conditions happened with surprising speed. In certain regions, temperatures appear to have dropped within a few decades, a pace that would have felt sudden to those living through it. You pause briefly, trying to imagine that. A world changing within a lifetime, perhaps even within a single generation. You continue walking. Other lines of inquiry propose that the change may not have been uniform everywhere. Some areas might have experienced more severe cooling, while others faced increased dryness or altered seasonal patterns. This uneven impact would have made survival even more complex. No single response would work everywhere. You adjust your path slightly, moving toward a small variation in the land ahead. It offers little in terms of shelter, but it breaks the flatness enough to draw your attention. As you approach, you notice something on the ground. Small fragments. You crouch to look more closely. They are pieces of stone, worked, shaped. You pick one up gently. Its edge has been formed with care, chipped in a way that suggests intention rather than chance. It fits easily in your hand, its shape designed for use. A tool, left behind. You turn it slightly, examining its surface. It has been used. Worn down in places. You set it back where you found it and stand. Evidence like this tells a quiet story. Human groups passed through here, adapted here, responded to the same conditions you are now experiencing. Some archaeologists suggest that tool styles can shift during periods of environmental stress, reflecting changes in how people interact with their surroundings. Others note that certain techniques remain consistent over long periods, even as conditions change. You take a slow breath. The cold air fills your lungs. You release it slowly. Then you continue walking. Your thoughts move again to the broader question. What truly caused this? There is no single answer. Some scientists focus on ocean circulation, proposing that disruptions in the flow of warm water altered climate patterns across vast regions. Others emphasize atmospheric changes, shift in wind and pressure that redistributed heat and moisture differently. There are also more debated ideas. The possibility of an external event, something arriving from beyond the Earth itself, has been explored. Certain layers of sediment contain materials that some interpret as evidence of such an occurrence. But not all agree. Many remain cautious, pointing out that the data can be read in different ways. You walk on, letting the uncertainty settle without discomfort. Not knowing the exact cause does not change what has happened. The land has cooled, water has receded, life has thinned. You pass another stretch of open ground, your steps steady. The wind continues, the cold remains, the silence holds. You begin to understand something else. The search for answers continues long after the event itself. Even now, in your own time, people study this period, examining every fragment, every trace, trying to piece together a clearer picture. They may never fully agree, and perhaps that is part of the nature of such vast changes. They leave behind questions as well as answers. You stop for a moment and look out across the land once more. It remains unchanged, quiet, pale, enduring. You take a slow breath. The air feels cold. You release it. The faint cloud appears, then fades. Then you begin to walk again, carrying with you not only the experience of this changing world, but also the understanding that even in the future, its story will remain something people continue to explore, question, and quietly wonder about. You continue walking your steps, steady your breath soft in the cold air. The land stretches before you in its quiet, pale stillness, but something about it feels slightly different now. Not warmer, not fuller, but changing again. You move across a gentle slope, your eyes scanning the ground as you go. The frost still appears in thin patterns, the soil remains firm, and the wind continues its steady movement. Yet in small places you begin to notice a shift. You slow, they're near your feet, a patch of green, faint, low to the ground, but present. You crouch and look more closely. The leaves are small, tightly formed, but they hold a deeper colour than the surrounding growth. You touch them gently. They feel firm, alive. You sit back slightly, letting the moment settle. This is not abundance, but it is change. You stand and continue walking, your attention now more focused on the details around you. As you move, you begin to notice more of these small patches. Not everywhere, not even common, but scattered. Quiet signs that something is beginning to return. In many climate records, the end of a severe cooling phase is often marked by gradual uneven recovery. Temperatures begin to rise slowly, precipitation patterns adjust, and vegetation starts to reappear in small resilient forms before expanding more widely. You walk on your steps calm. The wind still carries a chill, but it feels slightly less sharp. You notice it in the way it brushes against your face. Still cold, but softer. You take a slow breath. The air feels clearer, less heavy with dust. You release it slowly. You continue across the land, your eyes searching now not only for signs of loss, but for signs of return. You pass another stretch of ground and see it again. a cluster of plants slightly taller than the others. You stop and observe. Their leaves spread a little wider. Their stems stand a little higher. They are not struggling in the same way. You begin to understand. Recovery does not arrive all at once. It begins like this. Quiet, scattered, almost easy to miss. You walk on your pace steady. After some time you hear something. Faint. You stop. Listening. At first it blends with the wind. Then it becomes clearer. A sound you have not heard in a while. Insects. Soft. Distant. But present. You remain still, letting the sound settle into the quiet. It is not loud. Not constant. But it exists. You take a slow breath. The air feels slightly warmer. Not enough to change the cold entirely, but enough to soften its edge. You continue walking. The land ahead remains pale, but the subtle variations are becoming more noticeable. Small differences in colour, slight increases in growth. You reach a shallow dip in the land and step down into it. The air here feels different, less exposed. You kneel and touch the ground. It feels cool, but not as rigid. You press your fingers down slightly. There is a hint of softness beneath the surface. Moisture. Not much, but more than before. You sit back and look around. This place holds something. A small pocket where conditions have begun to shift. You stand and continue. As you move forward, you notice movement ahead. You focus your gaze. A small animal? It moves quickly across the ground, its body low, its steps light. You watch it for a moment as it disappears into a patch of growth. This is new. You have seen animals before, but not like this. Not moving with this kind of ease. Some ecological observations indicate that smaller species often return earlier during recovery phases, taking advantage of even slight improvements in conditions before larger animals follow. You take a slow breath. The air feels different again, still cold, but changing. You continue walking, your awareness steady. The world around you is no longer only a place of loss. It is becoming something else, something uncertain, but hopeful. You look out across the land. The patterns of change are subtle, but real. You take another step, then another, carrying forward into a world that is beginning slowly to recover from the edge it once reached. You continue forward your steps, light your breathing slow and steady in the cool air. The land stretches before you in its quiet openness, but now your eyes begin to notice more than just absence. There are details, small, subtle, but present. You walk across a gentle slope, your gaze moving carefully over the ground. The frost appears less often here, and when it does, it feels thinner, more fragile, as if it no longer holds the same strength. You kneel briefly and touch the surface. The cold remains, but beneath it there is a softness that was not there before. You press your fingers slightly deeper. The soil yields. Just enough. You sit back and take a slow breath. This is how the land begins to change again, not through sudden warmth, but through small returns. You stand and continue walking. As you move, you notice more patches of growth. They are still low, still cautious, but they appear more frequently now. Their colour is deeper, their structure less constrained. You pause near one cluster and observe. The leaves spread outward and not tightly drawn in as before. The plant reaches slightly higher as though testing the space around it. You touch it gently. It feels more flexible, more responsive. You stand again and walk on. The wind moves across the land, but it carries less dust now. The air feels clearer, the fine particles that once lingered seem reduced. You lift your hand briefly and let the air pass over it. It feels cool, but lighter. You lower your hand and continue. After some time you hear a sound, soft, intermittent. You stop, listening. It comes again. A bird, distant, but unmistakable. You remain still, letting the sound settle into the quiet. It does not repeat immediately, but its presence changes the space. You take a slow breath. The air feels calmer. You walk on. The land continues to shift in small ways. The pale tones remain, but they are interrupted more often now by patches of deeper colour. You begin to see patterns forming, not random, but growing. You reach another shallow depression and step into it. The air here feels slightly warmer, protected from the open wind. You kneel and touch the ground again. It is cool, but softer. You press down. The soil responds. You notice a faint trace of moisture. You sit back and look around. This place holds more than others. You begin to understand how recovery spreads. Not evenly, not all at once, but in pockets. In small areas where conditions shift just enough to allow life to return. You stand and continue walking. Ahead you notice movement again. You focus your gaze. A small group of animals. They move cautiously, but not with the same tension you saw before. Their steps are more relaxed, their spacing less tight. You watch them for a moment. One lowers its head toward the ground. Grazing, you take a slow breath. This is new. Not entirely, but different. Evidence from ecological recovery patterns suggests that as conditions improve, grazing animals often return gradually, responding to even slight increases in available vegetation. You walk on your awareness steady. The cold remains, but it feels less dominant, less controlling. You no longer wrap your arms around yourself as often. Your body has adjusted. The land is adjusting too. You reach a small rise and step onto it. From here you look out across the landscape. It still stretches wide, still quiet, but no longer as empty. You see scattered patches of growth, small movements in the distance, subtle variations in color and texture. You take a slow breath. The air feels cool, but balanced. You release it. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You stand there for a moment longer. Then you begin to walk again. Each step carrying you forward into a world that is no longer at its most fragile point, but not yet fully restored. A world in between, changing, recovering, quietly. You continue walking across the softly changing land, your steps calm your breathing, steady in the cool air. The world around you feels different now, not because it has fully recovered, but because it no longer feels on the edge. There is space here, space for life to return. You move along a gentle incline, your eyes tracing the ground as it shifts beneath your path. The soil feels more responsive underfoot, no longer as rigid as before. Your steps leave a faint impression, again small marks that remain for a moment before softening. You notice it immediately. The land is beginning to hold you differently. You pause briefly and look down. Your footprint rests lightly in the soil. You watch as a small breeze passes over it, softening the edges. Not erasing it, but reshaping it. You take a slow breath and continue. The wind moves across the landscape, still cool, but carrying a different quality now. It feels less sharp, less demanding. It brushes against your skin in a way that no longer requires constant awareness. You walk on. Ahead you begin to see more movement. Not distant this time. Closer, you slow your pace. A small group of early humans moves across the land, their figures steady, their steps measured. You observe them quietly, keeping your distance. Their behavior has changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. They are not as tightly grouped as before. Their spacing is more relaxed, their posture less constrained. One walks slightly ahead, another lingers behind, yet they remain connected. There is ease here, not complete, but present. You watch as one of them pauses near a patch of vegetation. They crouch, examine it, then begin to gather. The movement is careful, but not as tense as before. Another joins, then another. They work together, collecting what the land now offers. You take a slow breath. This is different. Earlier, every discovery felt uncertain, every movement cautious. Now there is something else. A quiet expectation. Not abundance, but possibility. Archaeological studies indicate that as environmental conditions improved after cold periods, human groups often expanded their activities, taking advantage of increased plant growth and more stable ecosystems. You continue watching. The group gathers what they need, then stands. They do not rush. They do not scan the land with the same urgency you saw before. They move on, calm, steady. You follow at a distance. The land beneath your feet continues to feel more alive. The soil holds a slight softness, the patches of vegetation more frequent. You pass another cluster of plants and pause. Their leaves spread outward. Their colour deep. You touch one gently. It bends slightly under your fingers. Flexible. You stand again and walk on. In the distance you hear a sound. Faint, but familiar. Water. You stop. listening. It comes again. Soft. Continuous. You turn toward it and begin to walk. The group ahead shifts direction as well, moving toward the same sound. You follow. The land slopes gently downward, guiding you toward a shallow channel. As you approach, the sound grows clearer. You step closer, and there it is. A stream. Small, narrow, but flowing. You crouch at the edge, watching the water move over the surface, clear and steady. You reach out and touch it. Cold, but alive, you sit for a moment, letting the sound fill the quiet around you. This is what has returned. Not in full. Not yet, but enough. Enough to begin again. You look around. The vegetation near the stream is thicker, more varied. Small plants grow closer together, their leaves reaching outward. You stand slowly and step back. The group gathers nearby, some crouching, some standing, all focused on the water. They drink. They pause. They remain for a moment longer than before. You watch them. There is no urgency, only presence. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler near the water, but also fuller, carrying a faint scent of moisture that was once absent. You release it slowly. The faint cloud appears, then fades. You begin to understand. The world has not returned to what it was, but it has moved away from the edge. You stand there for a moment longer. Then you turn and continue walking. The land stretches ahead, still quiet, still cool, but no longer defined only by survival. Now it holds something more. Continuation, adaptation, endurance. You walk on your steps, calm your awareness, steady, carrying with you the quiet knowledge that humanity has passed through its most fragile moment, and remained. You continue walking beyond the narrow stream, its soft sound fading gently behind you. The land opens once more, but it no longer feels as empty as it once did. There are signs now, subtle, scattered, but real. Your steps feel lighter, not because the journey has ended, but because something within the world has shifted. The air remains cool, brushing against your skin in steady currents, but it no longer carries the same sharpness. It feels balanced, settled into a new state that holds both memory and change. You move across a gentle rise and pause at the top. From here, the landscape stretches outward in quiet layers. Pale earth still dominates, but it's broken now by patches of green, small clusters of life that reach outward from the ground. You stand still, looking, taking it in. This is not the world you first stepped into, and it is not the one you passed through at its most fragile. It is something in between, a world that has endured, a world that has changed. You take a slow breath. The air feels cool, steady. You release it slowly, and for a moment everything feels still. Then you begin to walk again. Your path carries you across the land with a quiet sense of continuity. The patterns you have seen, the changes you have felt, they all settle into a deeper understanding. The earth does not remain fixed. It shifts. It moves through cycles that stretch far beyond a single lifetime. What you experienced was one of those moments, a time when the balance was lost, when the conditions that supported life became uncertain. And yet life did not disappear. It adapted. It endured. You walk past another small cluster of plants and pause briefly, touching one with your fingers. It bends gently. Alive. You stand and continue. The wind moves softly across the land, carrying the faint scent of earth and growth. The silence remains, but it is no longer heavy. It feels open. You look out again. In the distance you see movement. Small. Steady. Life continues. You take a slow breath. The world around you feels stable, not in the way it once was, but in a new way. A balance has returned, though different from before. You walk on your steps calm. You think about how close it came, how the cold spread, how the water disappeared, how life thinned. There were moments when survival narrowed to its smallest margin, moments when it could have ended. Some scientific estimates suggest that human populations during severe climatic events may have dropped to very low numbers, though the exact figures remain uncertain and continue to be studied. You let the thoughts settle quietly, not as something dramatic, but as something real. You continue walking. The land holds steady beneath you. The sky remains pale above. The wind moves softly around you. Everything feels calm. You reach another gentle slope and begin to descend. The light continues its slow fading, not into darkness, but into a softer, quieter tone. You walk on, and as you do, the world around you feels less like something you are passing through and more like something you are part of. A long journey, a quiet transformation, a moment in time that stretched across generations. You slow your steps. The air feels still. You take one more breath, then another, and you let the rhythm carry you. The land no longer feels fragile. It feels enduring. You continue walking, and as you move forward, the world settles gently around you, holding its quiet balance, carrying the memory of what it has passed through. Now as the journey comes to rest, the world around you begins to soften even further. The light fades into a gentle glow, the wind slows until it becomes barely noticeable, and the sounds of the land drift into a quiet background. You imagine yourself standing once more at the edge of that wide landscape, no longer searching, no longer moving with urgency. The ground beneath your feet feels steady. The air around you feels calm. There is no need to go further. No need to look ahead. Everything has settled. You take a slow breath, and it feels easy now, natural without effort. The cold no longer presses in the same way. It has become part of the world, balanced by the quiet return of life. In the distance, you can almost hear the faint movement of water again, soft and steady, blending with the gentle rhythm of the wind. The land rests, and within it life continues in its quiet, patient way. You let your awareness soften. Your steps slow, then stop. You stand there for a moment, held in the stillness, the quiet stretching gently around you like the end of a long day. And as everything settles, the world becomes softer, calmer, quieter still, until all that remains is a peaceful sense of rest. Sweet dreams,